The silk of my skirt snagged on a rusted pipe, tearing with a sound like a scream trapped in a throat. I didn't stop to look at the damage. I couldn't. The labyrinthine service tunnels beneath the Fairmont Copley Plaza smelled of stale grease, damp concrete, and the metallic tang of my own terror. Behind me, the muffled thrum of the engagement party continued, a sophisticated beast that had tried to swallow me whole. I was the guest of honor, the prize filly on display, the daughter of Senator William Evans, and as of 20 minutes ago, the most expensive piece of merchandise in Boston. I pushed through a heavy steel door marked "No Exit," the crash of the bar against my hip sending a jolt of pain at my spine that barely registered. My lungs burned. Every breath was a ragged gasp, scraping against my ribs. I had to get out. I had to disappear before they realized the bride-to-be hadn't just gone to the powder room to touch up her lipstick, but had vanished into the bowels of the hotel like a ghost. My mind kept replaying the conversation I wasn't meant to hear. It played on a loop, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had been standing just outside the library, pressing a cold glass of water to my forehead, trying to stave off the migraine that had been threatening me all day. The door had been cracked open just an inch. "She's spirited, William. I'll give her that," Lucas Vane had said. His voice was smooth, like oil slicked over asphalt. Lucas, my fiancé. The man who had courted me with charity galas and orchestrated photo ops. The man I thought was just a boring, ambitious politician. "But are you sure she won't ask questions about the transfer? The accounts are in her name. Chloe does what she's told," my father had replied. The dismissal in his tone was absolute. It wasn't the voice of a parent. It was the voice of a broker closing a deal. Once the marriage license is signed, the spousal privilege laws kick in. You get the access codes to the offshore holdings, I get the campaign financing from your associates, and if the feds ever look too closely at the Da Vinci laundromat, well, Chloe is the one whose signature is on the restoration contracts. She's the perfect scapegoat. An unstable artist with a history of anxiety? The jury will eat her alive. "And after?" Lucas had asked. "Once the assets are liquidated? Do whatever you want. An accident. An overdose. She's not necessary after the merger is complete." I stumbled, my heel catching on a grate. I fell hard, my knees slamming into the dirty concrete floor of the loading dock. The white satin of my Vera Wang gown, a dress that cost more than most people earned in a decade, soaked up the grime instantly. I scrambled up, ignoring the sting of scraped skin. They weren't just planning a marriage. They were planning a funeral. My funeral. I burst out of the loading bay doors and into the night. The weather had turned violent. A storm had been threatening all afternoon, and now it unleashed its fury upon the city. The wind hit me like a physical blow, icy and merciless. It wasn't just rain. It was a deluge that turned the world into a blur of gray and black. Within seconds, the heavy satin of my dress became a lead weight, dragging me down, clinging to my legs like drowning hands. My hair, pinned up in an intricate chignon with diamond-studded pins, began to collapse, wet strands plastering themselves against my face, blinding me. I kicked off my heels. They were useless now. I ran barefoot onto the asphalt, the rough surface biting into my soles, but the pain was grounding. It was real. The champagne-soaked lie back in the ballroom was the dream. This cold, hard pavement was the reality. I couldn't go to the police. My father controlled half the precinct, and Lucas owned the other half. I couldn't go to my apartment. It would be the first place they looked. I had no phone, no wallet, no ID. Everything was in the clutch I had left at the table. I was a ghost in a wedding dress, sprinting through the back alleys of Boston with nothing but the adrenaline pumping through my veins. Headlights swept across the brick wall to my left. Panic, sharp and electric, surged through me. I threw myself behind a dumpster that smelled of rotting fish and garbage. A black SUV rolled past slowly, prowling. It wasn't a police car. It was an unmarked Escalade with tinted windows. The kind of car that didn't exist on official records. I pressed a hand over my mouth to stifle the sob clawing its way up my throat. They were already hunting. I waited until the taillights faded around the corner before I moved. I needed cover. I needed a place where the senator's influence was weak, a place where the neatly manicured laws of Beacon Hill didn't apply. Instinct, primal and desperate, pulled me toward the north end, the old Italian district. The streets there were narrow, a tangled knot of history and secrets where a limousine couldn't fit, and where shadows were deep enough to hide a woman in white. I ran until my chest felt like it was filled with broken glass. I didn't know how long I had been moving. 10 minutes, an hour? Time had dissolved into the rhythm of my feet slapping against wet cobblestones. The architecture changed around me. The glass and steel of the financial district gave way to red brick, iron fire escapes, and the smell of basil and rain-slicked granite. My vision was spotting. The cold was seeping into my bones, making my teeth chatter so hard my jaw ached. I turned down a narrow street, Hanover, then took a sharp left into a dimmer, quieter alley. I needed to get indoors. Hypothermia was going to kill me before Lucas did if I stayed out here. I looked up at the building in front of me. It was a townhouse, imposing and stoic, built from dark brick that seemed to swallow the light. I recognized the ironwork on the gate. Years ago, before the funding was cut, this building had housed a private archive of Renaissance art restoration techniques. I used to come here as a student to study pigment compositions. I remembered the heavy oak door. I remembered there was a side entrance that used to be left unlocked for the delivery trucks. It was a desperate, stupid hope. The archive had closed 3 years ago. It was likely a private residence now, or gutted and empty, but I had nowhere else. I stumbled up the 3 stone steps, my bare feet slipping on the wet slate. I reached for the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. Tears, hot and frustrated, finally spilled over, mixing with the rain on my cheeks. I leaned my forehead against the wood, shivering violently. Please, I whispered to the universe, to God, to anyone listening, please don't let this be the end. Then I heard it, the distinctive aggressive hum of an engine turning into the alley. I whipped my head around. The black SUV had found me. It crawled toward me like a shark scenting blood in the water. The high beams blinded me, pinning me against the door like an insect on a display board. Terror replaced exhaustion. I pounded on the door with my fist. Open up! I screamed, my voice cracking. Please, help me! The car doors opened. Men stepped out. Not police, not security. These men wore leather jackets and moved with a predatory synchronization that spoke of violence as a profession. I saw the glint of metal in the hand of the lead man. A pistol, held low against his thigh. They weren't here to retrieve a bride. They were here to erase a problem. I hammered on the wood again, harder, until my knuckles bruised. Help! Is anyone there? Please! I heard the heavy click of a deadbolt sliding back. The door swung inward. I didn't wait for an invitation. I practically fell across the threshold, collapsing onto a foyer floor made of polished hardwood. Warmth washed over me, the smell of burning oak, old paper, and something deeper, darker, like sandalwood and tobacco. I scrambled backward, crab-walking until my back hit the wall, clutching the ruined bodice of my dress to my chest. I looked up. The man standing there was not the elderly archivist I remembered. He was a mountain of a man, framing the doorway with shoulders that strained against a white dress shirt. The shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the column of a thick, strong neck. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, exposing forearms corded with muscle and dusted with dark hair. In one hand, he held a tumbler of amber liquid. In the other, hidden partially behind the doorframe, was a gun, matte black, steady. He looked down at me. His eyes were dark, almost black in the dim light of the hallway, set beneath brows that were currently drawn together in calculation, not concern. He didn't look shocked to find a half-drowned bride on his doorstep. He looked annoyed. I choked out, water dripping from my hair into my eyes. They're going to kill me. He didn't answer. He looked past me, out into the rain. The sound of boots crunching on gravel echoed from the street. The men from the SUV were approaching. Hey, one of them shouted, his accent thick, guttural. That's our girl. Send her out and we walk away. The man in the doorway didn't flinch. He didn't even put down his drink. He stepped forward, crossing the threshold onto the small porch, placing himself between me and the encroaching darkness. He moved with a lethargic grace that was more terrifying than any sudden movement could have been. It was the confidence of an apex predator who knew exactly where he stood on the food chain. I huddled deeper into the shadows of the hallway, peering around his leg. There were 4 of them. They looked big, mean, and ready to tear this house apart. "You're lost," the man in the doorway said. His voice was a low rumble, a baritone that vibrated through the floorboards and into my shivering body. It wasn't a question. "We're not lost, pal," the leader of the mercenaries sneered, stepping into the halo of the porch light. He raised his gun slightly. "We're cleaning up a mess. The girl belongs to Senator Evans. We have instructions to retrieve her. Give her to us, and you don't have to deal with the fallout." The man took a slow sip of his whiskey. He swallowed, the movement of his throat hypnotic in the tension. "You must be new to Boston," he said, his tone conversational, bored even. "Or you would know that this house sits on Ravellini ground." The air in the alley seemed to freeze. Even I, sheltered in the suburbs and art galleries, knew that name. Ravellini, the family that ran the North End, the family that the police didn't touch, that the politicians didn't cross without permission. The mercenary leader hesitated, his gun lowered an inch. "We have a contract, and I have a headache," the man replied. "You stepped onto my property. You threatened a guest on my doorstep. In my world, that's not a contract dispute. That's a death wish." He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He simply existed with such absolute, suffocating authority that the violence in the air shifted. It wasn't directed at me anymore. It was radiating from him. "Turn around," he commanded softly. "Get back in your cheap car. Drive until you cross the city line. If I see your taillights in 5 seconds, I won't paint this street with your brains." The mercenary locked eyes with him. It was a test of will, a silent measurement of lethality. The mercenary blinked first. He cursed in a language I didn't recognize, Albanian maybe, and signaled to his men. They holstered their weapons, their body language shifting from aggression to survival. "This isn't over," the mercenary spat, backing away. "It is for you," the man said. He waited. He watched as they piled back into the SUV. He watched as the engine roared to life, and the vehicle reversed aggressively out of the alley, tires screeching on the wet stone. Only when the street was empty again did he turn back to me. He stepped inside and closed the door, the sound of the heavy locks snapping into place. 1, 2, 3 clicks was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It sounded like a cell door closing, but for the first time in hours, I was on the safe side of the bars. He loomed over me. Up close, he was devastating. His face was all sharp angles and hard planes, a jawline that could cut glass, and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. There were no scars on his face, nothing to mar the severe classical beauty of his features, but his eyes were old. They were the color of espresso, dark and impenetrable, and they were scanning me with a clinical precision that made me feel naked, despite the layers of wet silk. He looked at the mud on the hem of my gown. He looked at the bruises forming on my wrists where I had gripped the door. He looked at the diamond engagement ring that was still sliding around on my wet finger. "You're bleeding," he stated. I looked down. There was a cut on my arm I hadn't noticed, the blood swirling with the rainwater on my skin. I fell in the tunnels. "Who are you?" "Chloe," I whispered. My teeth were chattering so hard I could barely form words. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving me shaking violently. Chloe Evans. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but it wasn't surprise. It was calculation. The senator's daughter, the one who was supposed to marry Lucas Vane tonight. I flinched at the name. "Please, don't call them. Don't call the police. They'll kill me. My father, he's selling me. It's a setup." He stared at me for a long moment. He could have thrown me out. He could have called my father and ransomed me back for a fortune. He was a criminal. I knew what the Ravellini family was. They were monsters. But looking at him, I didn't see a monster. I saw a fortress. He set his whiskey glass down on a side table. He didn't offer me a hand to get up. Instead, he reached for a thick, dark towel that was hanging on a coat rack nearby. He dropped it onto my head. It was heavy, warm, and smelled like him. "Stand up, Chloe," he ordered. I struggled to my feet, my legs wobbling. The wet dress weighed 50 pounds. I clutched the towel around my shoulders, shivering. "Are you going to send me back?" He stepped closer. He was so tall I had to crane my neck to look him in the eye. He reached out, his hand large and warm, and brushed a wet strand of hair away from my cheek. His touch was rough, calloused, but surprisingly gentle. His thumb grazed my jawline, tilting my face up to the light. "Out there," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper that traveled straight to my marrow. "You are currency. You are a problem to be solved or an asset to be liquidated." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating off him. But here, his eyes locked onto mine, demanding total submission, total honesty. "Here, you are under my roof. And the Ravellinis protect what is theirs." My breath hitched. "I'm not yours. You knocked on my door," he murmured. "You crossed my threshold. Fate brought you here, but I am the one deciding to keep you." He stepped back, gesturing toward the interior of the house, a dark, sprawling expanse of shadows and luxury. "Stay with me," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in a promise. "Stay with me, and they will never touch you again." I looked at the door behind him, the barrier between me and the storm, between me and the death that awaited me at the hands of my own father. Then I looked at him, Marco Ravellini, the wolf who ruled the city. He was dangerous. He was lethal. But in his darkness, there was a strange, terrifying safety. I tightened the towel around myself, feeling the first returning sensation in my frozen fingers. I took a step toward him. "Okay," I whispered. He didn't smile. He just nodded, once, sharp and final. He turned and walked into the darkness of the house. And without looking back, he expected me to follow. And I did. The whiskey burned. It was a sharp, amber fire that coated my throat and settled in my empty stomach like a heavy stone. But it was the only thing keeping the tremors at bay. I sat in a high-backed leather wing chair that probably cost more than my entire tuition at the Restoration Institute, clutching the crystal tumbler with both hands. The library of the townhouse was vast, a cathedral of dark mahogany and shadows, illuminated only by the dying embers in the fireplace and a single brass lamp on the desk. Marco Ravellini stood by the window. He hadn't moved for 5 minutes. He was watching the street, his back to me, a silhouette of broad shoulders and coiled tension. He had discarded his jacket, and the white dress shirt stretched across his back as he crossed his arms. He hadn't asked me if I was cold. He hadn't asked me if I was hungry. He was letting me stew in the silence, waiting to see if I would crack. "My father isn't going to stop," I said. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, raspy, hollow, stripped of the polite cadence I had been trained to use at political fundraisers. "He has the entire Boston PD in his pocket. If you think the Ravellini name is enough to keep him away forever, you don't know William Evans." Marco turned slowly. The movement was fluid, predatory. He walked to the desk, poured himself another drink, and leaned against the heavy wood, crossing his ankles. He looked at me over the rim of his glass, his dark eyes unreadable. "I know your father, Chloe," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "I know he votes against organized crime bills in public and takes kickbacks from the Albanian mob in private. I know he's desperate, but desperation makes men sloppy. And tonight, he was very sloppy." He set the glass down with a sharp clink. "But I don't run a charity for runaway brides," he continued, his tone hardening. "You brought heat to my doorstep. Serious heat. I need to know why. Why would a senator sell his only daughter to a man like Lucas Vane? What is so important that he would risk a federal kidnapping charge to get you back?" I took another sip of whiskey, the alcohol finally numbing the stinging scrape on my knee. I looked around the room, my eyes landing on a painting hanging above the mantel. It was a portrait of a merchant, styled in the Dutch Golden Age tradition. The light, the shadow, the texture of the velvet coat. It was masterful. "That Vermeer," I said, pointing a trembling finger at the canvas. Marco glanced at it, a flicker of surprise breaking his stoic mask. "What about it?" "It's a fake," I stated flatly. He raised an eyebrow. I paid $3 million for that at a private auction in Zurich. It has papers of authentication from the Rijksmuseum. The papers are forged, I said, the professional part of my brain taking over, pushing the fear aside. Look at the craquelure near the hands. The cracks are too uniform. They fan out in a spiderweb pattern that suggests rapid thermal expansion. That canvas wasn't aged by 400 years of Dutch air. It was baked in a convection oven in a basement in New Jersey about 10 years ago. And the blue pigment on the coat, it's synthetic ultramarine. Vermeer used crushed lapis lazuli. The light refraction is completely different. Marco stared at the painting, then back at me. A corner of his mouth ticked up. It wasn't a smile, not really. It was an acknowledgement. Go on, he said. That's what I do, I told him, meeting his gaze. I'm a restorer. I specialize in provenance and layer analysis. My father, he owns a gallery. The Evans Collection. It's a front. For years, he's been having me restore works of art. He brings me pieces, tells me they need cleaning or relining. I didn't ask questions. I was just happy he was paying attention to me, happy to be useful. I swallowed hard, the bile rising in my throat. I wasn't restoring them, Marco. I was preparing them. He and Lucas, they use the paintings to transport information. Microfilms, digital drives, bearer bonds, hidden between the original canvas and the lining, or buried under layers of new gesso and overpaint. They ship the art internationally for exhibitions. It bypasses customs. No one scans a 16th century masterpiece for data smuggling. Marco went still. The air in the room shifted, becoming heavier, charged with a sudden, lethal intensity. He understood. He wasn't just a thug with a gun. He was a strategist. He saw the board. And tonight? He asked softly. I overheard them. I whispered. I wasn't supposed to be there. They were discussing the merger. My marriage to Lucas wasn't about politics. It was about consolidating the assets. Once I signed the marriage license, spousal privilege would prevent me from testifying if the feds ever found out. And once the transfer was complete, once the Da Vinci Project was fully laundered, you become a loose end, Marco finished. They were going to kill me, I said, the words tasting like ash. An overdose. An accident. It didn't matter. I was just the packaging for the deal. Marco pushed off the desk and walked toward me. He stopped inches from my chair, invading my space, forcing me to look up at him. He didn't touch me, but his presence was overwhelming. He smelled of rain and violence. Do you know which paintings? He asked. I know all of them, I said, my voice gaining strength. I know the chemical composition of the solvents needed to strip the layers without destroying the evidence. I know the shipping schedules. I know where the bodies are buried, Marco, because I'm the one who unwittingly dug the graves. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but I locked my knees. I wouldn't cower. Not anymore. I was done being a victim. You want to hurt Lucas Vane? I asked. You want to cripple my father's operation? I can give you the map. I can decode every single piece of art they have. And what do you want in return? I want to live, I said. And I want to burn their world down. Marco studied me for a long moment. He looked at my ruined dress, my wet hair, the fire in my eyes that mirrored his own. He reached out and took the empty glass from my hand, setting it aside on a bookshelf. Deal, he said. There was no contract, no handshake, just that single word, heavy with obligation. Pack your things, he said, turning toward the door. Then he paused. Wait, you don't have things. We're leaving. Now. Leaving? I asked, panic flaring again. Where? This townhouse is burned, Marco explained, checking the magazine of his pistol before sliding it back into his holster. Your father knows you're in the North End. He won't strike tonight because he's scared of a war. But by morning, he'll have a judge sign a warrant. We're going to the main estate, my territory, the only place in Massachusetts where a senator's badge means nothing. He didn't grab my arm. He didn't push me. He opened the door and waited. It was a choice. I could walk out into the rain and take my chances, or I could walk with him into the belly of the beast. I walked with him. The drive was a blur of rain-streaked windows, and silence. We took a different car, a heavy armored sedan that felt more like a tank than a luxury vehicle. Marco drove with one hand on the wheel, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't try to make small talk. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the city fade away. The skyscrapers of Boston gave way to the winding, dark roads of the North Shore. I should have been terrified. I was sitting next to the capo of the Ravellini crime family, a man rumored to have killed people with his bare hands. But looking at his profile in the dashboard lights, the sharp nose, the set jaw, the focus, I felt a strange, jarring sense of calm. For the first time in my life, the person beside me wasn't trying to manipulate me. He was just guarding the perimeter. We pulled up to iron gates that were easily 12 feet high. They swung open automatically as the car approached, revealing a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oaks. The Ravellini estate wasn't a house. It was a fortress masked as a mansion. Stone walls, slate roof, security cameras blinking red in the darkness of the trees. Marco parked in front of the main entrance. Men in dark suits materialized from the shadows before the engine even cut out. They weren't the disorganized thugs my father hired. These men were disciplined. They nodded to Marco with deference. "Boss," one of them said, opening Marco's door. He glanced at me, his expression impassive. "Is this the package?" Marco stepped out and walked around to my side. He opened my door before I could reach the handle. "She is not a package, Dante. She is a guest. Alert the perimeter team. We go to condition red. No one enters or leaves without my direct verbal authorization. If you see a badge, you lock the gates. If they try to breach, you hold the line." "Understood," Dante said, his eyes widening slightly at the escalation. Marco led me inside. The foyer was breathtaking. Black and white marble floors, a double staircase, a chandelier that looked like a cascade of frozen tears. But I didn't have time to admire the architecture. "The kitchen is through there," Marco said, pointing. "Get some food. Real food, not those canapes you were starving on." "Then go to the study, second door on the left." "I'm not hungry," I lied. "You're running on adrenaline and whiskey," he corrected me. "You eat. That's an order. I need you sharp, not fainting." He didn't wait for an argument. He turned and marched up the stairs, barking orders into a cell phone he had pulled from his pocket. 20 minutes later, I walked into the study. I had forced down a sandwich made by a silent, efficient housekeeper, and the sugar from the bread was finally clearing the fog in my brain. The study was the nerve center of the house. Screens covered one wall, displaying security feeds and stock market tickers. Marco was there, standing in front of a massive flat-screen television tuned to a national news network. He had changed his shirt, putting on a fresh black button-down, but he hadn't rolled down the sleeves. "Look at this," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I looked at the screen. My stomach dropped. It was a press conference. My father, Senator Evans, was standing at a podium, looking disheveled and distraught. A perfect performance. Lucas Vane stood beside him, looking grim and supportive. "My daughter, Chloe, has been struggling with severe mental health issues for some time," my father was saying, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. "The stress of the wedding. It caused a psychotic break. We believe she has been lured away by a dangerous criminal element who is taking advantage of her fragile state. She is not herself. She is confused, paranoid, and in need of immediate medical attention." The camera zoomed in on Lucas. "We just want Chloe home," Lucas said, looking directly into the lens. His eyes were cold, dead sharks swimming in blue water. "Chloe, if you're watching, please, take your medication. Come home. We love you." "Lies," I hissed, my hands balling into fists. Every word. "I don't take medication. I've never had a break." "They're setting the narrative," Marco said. "They're delegitimizing anything you say before you even say it. If you go to the press now, you're just the crazy girl ranting about conspiracies." On the screen, a reporter asked a question. "Senator, are there any leads on who she might be with?" "We have reason to believe she is being held against her will by Marco Ravellini," my father said, his voice trembling with fake rage. "A known crime boss. Let me be clear. If anything happens to my daughter, if a single hair on her head is harmed, I will bring the full force of the United States government down on his head. There will be no trial. There will be war. Marco didn't speak. He picked up a heavy crystal ashtray from the coffee table. He didn't throw it with wild anger. He threw it with terrifying precision. The heavy glass smashed into the center of the 80-inch screen. The TV exploded in a shower of sparks and plastic shards. The image of my father's lying face distorted, fractured, and then died into blackness. Silence rang in the room. Marco turned to me. His chest was heaving slightly, the only sign of the fury burning inside him. He thinks he can threaten me in my own city, Marco said, his voice low. He thinks he can use you as a shield. He walked over to a large oak table in the center of the room. He swept a pile of maps and ledgers onto the floor with a violent swipe of his arm. Come here, he commanded. I walked to the table. You said you have a map, Marco said, placing his hands flat on the wood. You said you know the operation. I do. Draw it, he said. He grabbed a tablet from a side table and slid it toward me. Right now. Show me everything. Where are the paintings? Who are the buyers? What is the timeline? I picked up the stylus. My hand hovered over the digital screen. This was it. The point of no return. Once I wrote this down, I was an accomplice. I was betraying my blood. I was declaring war on my father. I looked at Marco. He wasn't looking at the tablet. He was looking at me, waiting, not forcing me, but witnessing me. You're not a prisoner here, Chloe, he said, reading my hesitation. The gates open from the inside, too. You can walk away. But if you stay, you fight. Can you do that? I thought about the medication comment. I thought about the years of being told to sit still, look pretty, and sign the papers. I thought about the cold, damp tunnel and the way Marco had stood between me and the mercenaries without blinking. I'm not walking away, I said. I touched the stylus to the screen. The shipment leaves on Thursday, I began, sketching the layout of the gallery warehouse. They're moving 12 crates. But the real money isn't in the crates. It's in the centerpiece for the auction. A painting called The Silent Madonna. It's supposed to be a restoration of a Renaissance piece. And it's not. No, I said, drawing a diagram of the frame structure. It's a vault. The canvas is lined with lead. Underneath the oil paint, in the texture of the dress, that's where the ledger is. Not just money. Names, agents, judges, everyone on Lucas's payroll. Marco watched the lines appear on the screen, his mind working as fast as mine. He leaned in, his shoulder brushing against mine. The heat of his body was distracting, grounding. If we get that painting, Marco murmured, we don't just stop the money, we own them. Yes, I said, but it's heavily guarded. It's at the Lombra Gallery, underground, high security. I don't care if it's in the Vatican, Marco said, straightening up. His eyes were dark fire. We're taking it. He looked at me, really looked at me, seeing not the ruined bride, but the architect of his victory. You need clothes, he said abruptly, the intensity shifting from war back to logistics. You can't plan a heist in a wedding dress. I don't have anything. I'll have my sister send things over in the morning. For now. He walked to a closet in the corner of the room and pulled out a black t-shirt and a pair of gray sweatpants. He tossed them to me. Wear these. The guest suite is next to mine. Try to sleep. I caught the clothes, clutching them to my chest. Marco? He paused at the door. What? Why did you break the TV? I asked softly. You didn't have to do that. He looked back at the shattered screen, then at me. His expression softened, just a fraction. I don't like liars, he said. And I didn't like the way he looked at you, even through a screen. He opened the door. Get some rest, Chloe. Tomorrow we steal a masterpiece. He left, closing the door softly behind him. I stood alone in the study, surrounded by the wreckage of the television and the blueprint of my betrayal. I looked down at the black shirt in my hands. It was soft cotton. I brought it to my face. It smelled like sandalwood and rain. I wasn't safe. I was in the center of a hurricane. But for the first time in 26 years, I wasn't just a doll in a box. I was the one holding the match. And Marco Ravellini had just given me the gasoline. The tiny earpiece hummed with static against my ear canal, a constant buzzing reminder that I was no longer Chloe Evans, the runaway bride. I was an operative, a weapon, a thief. I stood in front of the floor-to-length mirror in the guest suite of the Ravellini estate. But the reflection staring back was a stranger. Marco hadn't sent for a stylist or a personal shopper. He had sent a tactical team disguised as tailors. The dress wasn't chosen for its beauty, though it was devastatingly elegant. A column of midnight black silk that fit like a second skin. It was chosen for its engineering. The slit on the left side went high up my thigh, not to tease, but to allow for a full range of motion if I needed to sprint. The bodice was reinforced, tight enough to hold the wire running down my spine, but flexible enough to allow deep breaths. And the shoes. They looked like jagged stilettos, weapons in their own right, but the soles were lined with a red, grippy rubber compound usually found on combat boots. "Turn around!" Marco's voice came from the doorway. I spun, my heart doing a traitorous double tap against my ribs. He was leaning against the doorframe, dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than the gallery we were about to rob. The black tie hung loose around his neck, yet to be knotted. He looked lethal. Civilized, yes, like a panther in a diamond collar, but lethal nonetheless. "The wire is visible near the neckline," he noted, pushing off the frame and walking toward me. He didn't ask for permission. He stepped into my personal space, the scent of sandalwood and gun oil enveloping me instantly. His large, warm hands brushed against the bare skin of my neck, sending goosebumps cascading down my arms. He tucked the thin wire beneath the silk strap, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary on my pulse point. "Your heart is racing," he murmured, his voice low and rough, vibrating through my chest. "I'm about to rob my father," I whispered, meeting his dark gaze in the mirror, and infiltrate a room full of people who think I'm currently having a psychotic break in a padded cell. "You aren't robbing him," Marco corrected, his eyes locking onto mine in the glass. "You are reclaiming what was stolen. And you aren't Chloe Evans tonight. You are Elena Koval, a private equity investor from Zurich, with a taste for religious iconography and a mute husband." "You're not going to talk? My accent is too distinct," Marco said, finally tying his tie with efficient, sharp movements. "In Boston, a Ravellini voice opens doors, but it also triggers alarms. Tonight, I am merely the muscle and the wallet. You are the face." He turned me around to face him, his hands settling heavily on my waist. The heat of his palms seeped through the silk, branding me. "Listen to me, Tesoro," he commanded, his intensity stripping the air from the room. "We are walking into the lion's den. L'Ombra isn't just a gallery, it's a bunker for the corrupt. Lucas will be there. Your father might be there. If you freeze, we die. If you panic, we die. You need to turn off the part of you that is a daughter and turn on the part of you that survived the tunnels." "I can do it," I said, though my voice trembled slightly. "I know you can," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sleek object, a UV flashlight, no bigger than a lipstick tube. He pressed it into my hand. "Find the painting. Verify the lead lining. Signal the team. Then get behind me." He offered me his arm. "Shall we go to the ball, Cinderella?" The drive to the financial district was silent. We didn't take the armored tank this time. We took a sleek, silver Aston Martin that blended in with the excess of the event. L'Ombra was located in the sub-basement of a skyscraper that housed 3 hedge funds and a law firm specializing in acquittals for the guilty. The elevator ride down was a descent into a different world. The doors slid open to reveal a cavernous space of polished concrete, exposed industrial pipes painted gold, and walls lined with art that was meant to intimidate rather than inspire. The lighting was low, amber and moody, designed to make the jewelry of the guests sparkle and to hide the flaws in the merchandise. "Stay close." Marco breathed into my ear, his arm tightening around my waist. We stepped into the crowd. It was a sea of masks and malice. This was a masquerade auction, a convenient affectation that allowed the city's elite to indulge in their vices anonymously. I adjusted the black lace mask over my eyes, grateful for the barrier. The air smelled of expensive champagne, ozone, and the metallic tang of avarice. I scanned the room, my professional eye automatically cataloging the art on the walls. It was a graveyard of forgeries and stolen masterpieces. To my left, a Basquiat that had clearly been painted by an art student in a loft in Brooklyn. To my right, a legitimate Roman bust that had been reported stolen from a dig site in Italy 4 years ago. Focus. Marco's voice crackled in my ear, though he was standing right beside me. Target is on the north wall. We moved through the throngs of people. A judge I recognized from the nightly news nodded at us. A tech billionaire raised a glass. They saw the tuxedo and the dress, the posture of arrogance, and accepted us as one of their own. It was sickening. Then I saw it. The silent Madonna. It was displayed on a standalone easel in the center of a velvet-roped area, bathed in a focused spotlight. It was grotesque. Not the painting itself. It was a technically proficient imitation of a Raphael Madonna. But the context. The face of the Madonna was serene, her hands clasped in prayer, but the texture was wrong. Even from 10 feet away, I could see the unnatural heaviness of the canvas. It didn't drape. It stood rigid. "It's here," I whispered, barely moving my lips. "We need to get closer," Marco replied. "I need you to verify the lining before we cut. If we slice into a decoy, the alarms trip silently and the doors seal." We began to move toward the ropes, but the crowd parted suddenly, creating a wide berth. My blood turned to ice. Lucas Vane was walking toward the exhibit. He wasn't wearing a mask. He didn't need to. His arrogance was his disguise. He looked impeccable in a midnight blue tuxedo, a glass of scotch in one hand, his other hand resting possessively on the shoulder of a young, terrified-looking intern who was holding a catalog. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas announced, his voice smooth and projecting easily over the murmur of the room. "Thank you for joining us for the highlight of the evening, the Silent Madonna, a piece that represents purity, sacrifice, and silence." He laughed at his own joke. The room tittered nervously. I stopped walking. My breath hitched. He was right there, 20 feet away. The man who had planned my death. The man who had looked me in the eye and told me he loved me while signing off on my murder. "Chloe." Marco's voice was a sharp command in my ear. "Don't look at his face. Look at his tie. Look at his shoes. He is just a target. He is prey." Marco's hand slid from my waist to the small of my back, his thumb pressing hard into my spine, grounding me. The pain was sharp and necessary. It pulled me back from the precipice of panic. "I'm okay," I breathed. "He's distracted," Marco noted. "He's preening. Move to the left flank. Use the sculpture for cover." We drifted to the side, slipping behind a massive, abstract bronze sculpture that looked like twisted wreckage. From this angle, we were in the shadows, just outside the direct line of sight of Lucas's security detail. 2 men standing by the pillars, looking bored. "Now," Marco said, "I'm going to create an opening. When the glass breaks, you move. You have 3 seconds to check the canvas with the UV. Do not hesitate. What are you going to do? Something clumsy." Marco detached himself from me. He moved toward a waiter carrying a tower of champagne flutes. He didn't shove the man. That would be too obvious. He simply extended his foot. A subtle, calculated trip at the exact moment the waiter turned. The result was spectacular. The waiter stumbled, the tray tipped, and 50 crystal flutes crashed onto the polished concrete floor with the sound of a shattering chandelier. The noise was deafening in the hushed gallery. Champagne sprayed onto the gown of a senator's wife. People gasped, shouted, and surged backward to avoid the glass. The security guards turned their heads. Lucas turned his head. "Go!" Marco hissed in my ear. I moved. I didn't run. I glided, crossing the distance to the velvet rope in 2 long strides. I ducked under the rope. I was now in the spotlight. I pulled the UV light from my clutch, thumbing the switch. I pressed the light against the bottom corner of the painting, where the paint was thinnest. A dull, sickly green fluorescence reflected back. Not the purple of canvas, or the white of gesso. Green, the specific chemical reaction of lead treated with a shielding agent. "It's confirmed," I said, my voice shaking with adrenaline. Lead lining, it's the vault. Step back, Marco ordered. He was there instantly. He had used the chaos of the crash to ghost through the crowd. He vaulted the velvet rope with a fluid grace that belied his size. In his hand, a scalpel appeared, surgical steel gleaming under the gallery lights. He didn't hesitate. He slashed the canvas. It wasn't a random tear. It was a precise rectangular incision around the central figure of the Madonna. The sound of the thick, lead-lined canvas ripping was visceral, like skin tearing. A collective gasp went up from the room. "He's destroying it!" someone screamed. "Security!" Lucas roared, his composure shattering. Marco ripped the center of the painting free. He didn't look at the art. He looked at what fell out from behind the lead sheet, a thin, flat packet wrapped in mylar. He snatched it up and shoved it into his jacket pocket. "Move." Marco grabbed my hand. The spell broke. The security guards drew their weapons, tasers and batons. Guns were too risky in a crowd of donors, and charged. "Kitchen!" Marco shouted, pulling me toward the service doors to the right of the exhibit. We sprinted. My heels slammed against the concrete, the red grip soles doing their job. We hit the double swinging doors of the kitchen just as the first taser prong whizzed past my ear, embedding itself in the doorframe with a spark. The kitchen was a labyrinth of stainless steel, steam, and shouting chefs. We burst through, startling a line of cooks plating appetizers. "Out of the way!" Marco roared, his voice booming over the clatter of pots. We wove through the prep stations. The exit was at the far end, past the dishwashing pit. But as we rounded the corner, the rear exit door burst open. 2 men in suits blocked the way. These weren't gallery security. These were professionals. Evan's personal detail. "Nowhere to go, Ravellini," the larger one snarled, snapping an extendable baton. Marco didn't slow down. He didn't even pause to negotiate. He released my hand. "Get the door code," he ordered me. "I'll handle the trash." I scrambled toward the keypad next to the locked loading dock door. The red light blinked mockingly. I needed a 4-digit PIN. Behind me, the sound of violence erupted. It wasn't the cinematic fighting of movies. It was brutal, ugly, and fast. I heard the crack of bone, the wet thud of a fist hitting a kidney. I glanced back for a second. Marco had ducked under the baton swing, trapped the man's arm, and used the man's own momentum to drive his face into the stainless steel counter. The man crumpled. The second guard lunged at Marco with a knife. "The code, Chloe." Marco grunted, dodging the blade by an inch. "Think, what does your father love?" My mind raced. My birthday? No, he barely remembered it. His anniversary? No. The date he was elected? Too public. Then I remembered the painting, the fake Vermeer, the date on the fake authentication papers. 1665. I punched it in. 1 to 6 to 6 to 5. Electronic buzz. Access denied. "Wrong code," I screamed. Marco caught the knife hand, twisting the guard's wrist until I heard a sickening snap. The guard screamed, dropping the weapon. Marco kicked him in the chest, sending him flying into a rack of drying pots. "Try again," Marco yelled, backing toward me, breathing hard but uninjured. "Think like him. What is his password for everything?" I closed my eyes, visualizing my father's office, his safe, his ego. It wasn't a date. It was a number. The number of votes he won by in his first landslide victory. The number he bragged about at every dinner party. 2412. I keyed it in. The light turned green. The heavy hydraulic lock hissed. "Got it." I shoved the door open. Rain and cold night air blasted into the hot kitchen. We spilled out onto the loading dock. The alley was dark, slick with oil and water. "Where's the car?" I gasped, looking around. The Aston Martin was parked blocks away. We couldn't go back to the front. "There!" Marco pointed to a nondescript gray sedan idling halfway down the alley. "Plan B." We ran for it. But the back door of the kitchen slammed open again. Lucas Vane stood there. He wasn't holding a drink anymore. He was holding a gun. A silver revolver that looked too large for his manicured hand. "Chloe!" he screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "You ungrateful bitch!" He raised the gun. Marco didn't dive for cover. He stepped in front of me, shielding my body with his own. He raised his own weapon, the Beretta he had pulled from his waistband. Lucas fired. The shot went wild, sparking off the brick wall 3 feet to our left. He was panicking. He wasn't a shooter. He was a politician. Marco didn't miss. He fired 2 shots. Not to kill. Too much paperwork. Too much heat for a public figure. He shot the ground in front of Lucas, sending shards of concrete flying into his shins, and then he shot the light fixture above the door, plunging the dock into darkness. "Car! Now!" Marco shoved me toward the driver's side of the gray sedan. "Me?" I yelled. "I need to cover the rear. You drive." I didn't argue. I threw myself into the driver's seat. The keys were already in the ignition. I twisted them, and the engine roared to life. It was a sleeper car, shabby on the outside, modified racing engine on the inside. Marco dove into the passenger seat just as I slammed the gear shift into drive. "Go! Go! Go!" I floored it. The tires spun on the wet asphalt, smoking, then caught traction. The car fishtailed violently, missing a dumpster by inches, and shot out of the alley onto the main street. "Left!" Marco shouted, checking the side mirror. "We have company." I glanced at the rearview mirror. 2 black SUVs were peeling out of the garage exit behind us. The mercenaries. "Hold on," I gritted out. I took the corner onto Congress Street at 60 miles an hour. The back of the car swung out, drifting. I steered into the skid, correcting with a reflex I hadn't used since the defensive driving course my father made me take, after a kidnapping scare when I was 12. "They're gaining," Marco said calmly. He rolled down his window. The wind and rain whipped into the cabin. He leaned out, bracing his arms on the doorframe, the Beretta steady in his grip. Bang, bang, bang. The shots were deafening inside the car. Behind us, the lead SUV swerved. Marco had hit the front tire. The massive vehicle lost control, hydroplaning across the lanes and slamming into a parked delivery truck with a crunch of metal that vibrated through my steering wheel. "One down," Marco said, pulling back inside and rolling up the window. He looked at me. There was no fear in his eyes. There was something else. A wild, electric approval. "You drive like a getaway driver," he noted, sounding almost impressed. "I learned to drive so I could run away from him," I said, my knuckles white on the wheel. I just never had a place to run to until tonight. We sped through the red light at the intersection, leaving the chaos of the financial district behind. The adrenaline was starting to shake my hands, but the car was steady. "Where are we going?" I asked, my breathing ragged. "The estate?" "No," Marco said, checking the packet he had stolen from the painting. He tucked it safely into the glove compartment. "The estate is too obvious. They'll expect us to go to ground. We're going to the safe house in the Berkshires. It's off the grid. No cameras, no satellite linkage." He reached over and placed his hand on my thigh, his thumb rubbing soothing circles against the tense muscle. The touch was grounding, pulling me back from the edge of hysteria. "You did good, Chloe," he said quietly. "You didn't freeze." "I wanted to," I admitted. "When I saw him, when I saw Lucas, I wanted to throw up." "But you didn't," Marco said. "You acted. That's the difference between a victim and a survivor." I looked at him for a split second, before turning my eyes back to the rain-slicked road. He was right. I had walked into the lion's den. I had looked the monster in the face, and I had stolen his prize. "The painting?" I asked. "What's in the packet?" Marco opened the glove box and pulled out the mylar envelope. He ripped it open. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't a ledger. It was a stack of transparent films, microdots. "It's not just names," Marco said, holding one up to the passing streetlights. "These are schematics, blueprints." "For what?" "For a building," Marco said, his voice turning ice cold. "A federal building. Chloe, they aren't just laundering money. They're selling infrastructure vulnerabilities to foreign cells. This isn't corruption. This is treason." The weight of what we had just done settled over us. We hadn't just robbed a gallery. We had just intercepted an act of war. They won't stop hunting us now, I whispered. They can't. Good, Marco said, racking the slide of his empty gun to reload a fresh magazine. Because I'm tired of running. He looked at me, his eyes dark and promising violence. Let them come, he said. We'll be waiting. I pressed the accelerator harder, the engine growling in response. The city lights faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the encroaching darkness of the highway. I wasn't the senator's daughter anymore. I wasn't the runaway bride. I was the driver of the getaway car, and for the first time in my life, I was choosing the direction. The gray sedan crunched over gravel and dead leaves, the headlights cutting through the relentless curtain of rain that had followed us all the way from Boston to the Berkshires. We were miles from civilization, deep in a forest that felt ancient and indifferent to the violence we had just escaped. The safe house wasn't a cabin. It was a bunker dressed up in cedar and stone, squatting low against the earth as if trying to hide from the sky itself. Marco killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing in my ears after hours of the roaring engine and the phantom echo of gunshots. We're clear, he said, his voice rougher than usual. I looked over at him in the dim light of the dashboard. He was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. But it wasn't anger. It was pain. His left arm was held rigid against his side, and a dark stain was spreading across the sleeve of his tuxedo jacket, turning the expensive fabric slick and black. You're losing blood, I said, my voice snapping into the clinical tone I used when assessing a damaged canvas. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not when the only thing standing between me and a shallow grave was currently bleeding out in the driver's seat. It's a scratch, Marco grunted, opening his door. Grab the packet from the glove box. It's not a scratch, Marco. You took a knife meant for my throat. He didn't argue. He stepped out into the rain, moving with a stiff, guarded gait that terrified me more than if he had collapsed. Marco Ravellini was a force of nature. Seeing him vulnerable felt like watching a mountain crack. I grabbed the stolen microdots, shoved them into my pocket, and followed him. The interior of the house was cold, smelling of stale air and pine. Marco punched a code into a keypad by the door, and the security lights flickered on, revealing a space that was utilitarian and stark. Leather furniture, bare walls, a kitchen that looked like it had never been used. There were no personal touches, no photos, no life. This was a place people came to survive, not to live. Marco walked straight to the kitchen island and leaned heavily against the granite counter. He hissed a breath through his teeth, his face paling beneath the tan. First aid kit, I demanded, throwing my wet jacket onto a bar stool. Where is it? Bathroom. Under the sink, he managed to say, his eyes closing for a brief second. I ran. I didn't just walk. I sprinted to the bathroom, falling to my knees to wrench open the cabinet. It wasn't a standard drugstore kit. It was a trauma bag. Suture kits, coagulants, morphine, sterilized scalpels. The tools of his trade. I grabbed the bag and a bottle of rubbing alcohol and ran back. Marco had managed to peel off his jacket. His white dress shirt was ruined, the entire left sleeve saturated with blood. He was trying to undo the buttons with one hand, his fingers clumsy and shaking slightly. Stop, I ordered, moving into his space. Let me. He looked at me, his dark eyes hazy with pain but still sharp with that intense, unnerving focus. He dropped his hand. I stepped between his legs, my fingers working quickly to undo the buttons. I peeled the wet, bloody cotton away from his skin, wincing as the fabric stuck to the wound. The gash was ugly, a jagged slice running 4 inches down his bicep, deep enough that I could see the red rawness of the muscle beneath the subcutaneous layer. It was bleeding sluggishly now, but it was wide and angry. This needs stitches, I said, examining it with the same detachment I used for a torn Renaissance tapestry, and it needs to be cleaned. It's going to hurt. Do it, Marco said. He gripped the edge of the granite counter with his good hand, his biceps flexing as he braced himself. I washed my hands, snapped on a pair of latex gloves from the kit, and poured the alcohol over the wound. Marco didn't scream. He didn't even groan. His jaw clamped shut so hard I saw a muscle feather in his cheek, and a sharp intake of breath hissed through his nose. His body went rigid, hard as stone against my hip, but he didn't pull away. "Breathe," I whispered, dabbing the wound with sterile gauze. "You have to breathe, Marco." "I'm fine," he ground out. "You're a terrible liar." I threaded the suture needle. My hands, which had been trembling on the steering wheel an hour ago, were now perfectly steady. This was mechanics. This was repair. I knew how to stitch canvas to hold for centuries. Skin wasn't so different. I need you to stay still. If you move, the scarring will be worse. "I don't care about scars," he murmured, watching my face instead of his arm. "I do," I said softly. "I spend my life removing them from things that are beautiful. I pierce the skin." He flinched. Just a microscopic tremor, but held his ground. I worked methodically, tying off each knot with precision. The silence in the room was intimate, heavy with the sound of the rain drumming on the roof and our synchronized breathing. "Why do you do this?" I asked, needing to fill the silence, needing to distract him from the needle sliding through his flesh. "The crime, the violence. You aren't like the thugs my father hires. You're educated. You have an eye for art. You could have been anything." Marco watched my hands. "I wasn't the heir," he said, his voice straining as I tightened a stitch. "My brother, Santino, he was the golden child. He was being groomed to take over, to legitimize the family. I was the spare. I went to university. I studied architecture." I looked up, surprised. "Architecture?" "I wanted to build things," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, bitter and fleeting. "Structures that lasted. Things that couldn't be corrupted." "What happened?" "Santino was soft," Marco said, his face hardening. "He thought he could negotiate with wolves like the Albanians. He thought honor meant something to them. They killed him 6 years ago. My father, he broke. He couldn't lead. Someone had to step in. Someone had to burn the wolves to keep the pack safe. I tied off the final stitch and snipped the thread. So you became the monster to fight the monsters." "I became what was necessary," he corrected. He looked at the neat row of black sutures on his arm. "Just like you became the perfect daughter to survive the senator." I stripped off the gloves and threw them in the trash. I poured whiskey onto a clean cloth and wiped the blood from around the wound, my touch gentler now that the work was done. "I wasn't a daughter," I said, my voice quiet. "I was an asset, a portfolio. My father didn't see me. He saw a merger opportunity. He saw a way to hide his sins." Marco reached out with his good hand. He caught my chin, tilting my face up until I was forced to look at him. The intensity in his eyes burned away the cold of the room. "I see you," he said. The air left my lungs. It wasn't a line. It wasn't a manipulation. It was a fact, stated with the same absolute certainty he used when he ordered men to die. "You didn't flinch in the gallery," he murmured, his thumb brushing over my lower lip. "You drove through a firefight. You just sewed me up without shaking. You aren't an asset, Chloe. You're a weapon he didn't know how to wield." "Marco, he wanted to sell you," he growled, the anger vibrating in his chest. "He wanted to give you to a man like Lucas Vane, who would have broken you just to see the pieces shine. The thought of him touching you, of anyone touching you." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He pulled me closer, his hand sliding into the wet hair at the nape of my neck. The distance between us vanished. The smell of him, antiseptic, blood, sandalwood, and raw male heat, flooded my senses. My hands found purchase on his bare chest. His skin was fever hot. I could feel the heavy, powerful beat of his heart against my palms. "I'm not afraid of you," I whispered, the realization crashing over me. I should have been. He was a killer. He was dangerous, but he was the only thing in the world that felt solid. "You should be," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper against my mouth. "Because once I kiss you, I'm never letting you go. There is no going back to the gallery, no going back to the life you knew. You stay with me, in the dark, in the blood, always. I don't want to go back," I breathed. "I want to stay." He didn't wait. He crushed his mouth to mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It was a collision of two people who had been running on the edge of a cliff for too long and finally decided to jump. He tasted of whiskey and danger. His tongue swept into my mouth. Demanding, taking, possessing. I made a sound in the back of my throat, a whimper of need that I hadn't known I was capable of making. My fingers curled into his shoulders. I pulled him closer, needing to eliminate every millimeter of space between us. He lifted me, effortlessly. Despite the wound, despite the blood loss, he hoisted me up onto the granite island. He stepped between my thighs, pressing his hips against mine, the hard ridge of his desire undeniable against the thin fabric of my sweatpants. Mia Regina. He groaned against my neck, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin there. My queen, you belong to me. Say it. I'm yours, I gasped, throwing my head back as his lips trailed fire down my throat. I'm yours, Marco. He stripped the shirt off me. The air was cold, but his hands were searing. He looked at my body, not with lust, but with reverence, like I was the masterpiece he had stolen, the only thing of value in a world of fakes. Beautiful, he breathed. Perfect. There was no fumbling, no awkwardness. It was primal. When he entered me, I felt it in my soul. It was a grounding, an anchoring. The storm outside raged, wind battering the windows, but in that kitchen, on that cold granite counter, I was burning. We moved together in a rhythm that was frantic and desperate, a reaffirmation of life in the face of the death we had narrowly escaped. Every touch was a promise. Every kiss was a seal. I wrapped my legs around him, pulling him deeper, wanting to absorb his strength, his darkness. I wanted him to mark me, to change me, so that no matter what happened tomorrow, I would never be the same again. When the end came, it shattered me. I cried out his name, my body bowing off the counter, burying my face in the crook of his neck. He followed me seconds later, a guttural roar tearing from his throat as he poured himself into me. We stayed like that for a long time, tangled together, breathing hard, his forehead resting against mine. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a heavy, languid exhaustion. But the fear was gone. I wasn't alone anymore. Eventually, Marco pulled back. He kissed my swollen lips, then my forehead. He didn't pull away emotionally. He just adjusted my shirt, covering me with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rasping. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. He hopped off the counter and helped me down. His arm was bleeding again, a small spot of red blooming on the gauze, but he ignored it. "We need to see what we have," he said, the soldier returning to duty, but he kept his hand on my lower back, keeping me connected to him. We walked to the living area. Marco retrieved the packet of microdots from the table where I'd left them. He pulled a specialized laptop from a secure case under the sofa, a military-grade machine that looked like it could survive a bomb blast. He sat on the leather couch and pulled me down next to him. I leaned my head on his shoulder, watching the screen boot up. "It's old tech," Marco noted, holding one of the films up to the light. "Analog storage, smart. It can't be hacked remotely." He slipped the film into a specialized scanner attachment on the side of the laptop. The screen flickered, blue code cascading down the terminal. "Here we go," he muttered. An image appeared on the screen. It was a digital scan of the documents hidden in the painting. My heart hammered. This was it. The proof. But as the file opened, a red box flashed on the screen. "Encryption detected. Biometric key required." "Damn it," Marco cursed softly. "What?" I sat up. "What does it mean?" "It means the data is scrambled," Marco said, pointing to the chaotic jumble of characters on the screen. "Your father isn't an idiot. He didn't just hide the files. He locked them. See this algorithm? It's a dual-key system. We have the data, but we don't have the Rosetta Stone to read it." "Is it a password?" I asked. "A number?" "No." Marco shook his head, frustration tightening his jaw. "Look at the prompt. Insert physical token. It's a hardware key, a drive, a chip, something physical that completes the circuit." I closed my eyes. visualizing my father's office, his habits. He wears a necklace, I said slowly. A silver chain. He never takes it off. There's a pendant on it. It looks like a chess piece, a black rook. Marco looked at me. A rook? Yes. He told me it was a family heirloom. But the Evans family were farmers, Marco. They didn't have heirlooms. He touches it when he's nervous. He was holding it tonight during the press conference. That's it, Marco said. That's the key. The USB drive is inside the pendant. So we have the lock, I said, a cold dread settling in my stomach. But the key is around his neck, and he's surrounded by federal agents. We can't get to him, Marco admitted. Not without starting a war that levels half the city. If he's in federal custody, or even under their protection, he's untouchable. He reached for the remote control on the table and flicked on the small television mounted in the corner. Let's see what the narrative is. The news channel was live. The banner at the bottom of the screen was bright red. Breaking news. The reporter was standing outside the Lombra Gallery. Police lights strobed in the background, painting the wet street in chaotic flashes of blue and red. Authorities have escalated the search for Chloe Evans, the reporter said, looking grave. Following a violent altercation at a downtown gallery tonight, police have issued a federal warrant. My breath hitched. A warrant for me? No, Marco said. Listen, police are seeking Marco Ravellini, the reporter continued. Not just for kidnapping, but now for acts of domestic terrorism. Sources say shots were fired and an explosive device was detonated inside the gallery. Explosive device? I gasped. You shot a light fixture. They're spinning it, Marco said, his face grim. But that's not the worst part. The screen cut to a new graphic. It was a photo of me. Not the polished socialite photo, but a grainy image from a security camera tonight. Me running from the gallery. Me holding a gun. Wait, I wasn't holding a gun. I was holding the UV light. But in the grainy footage, it looked like a pistol. Chloe Evans is now considered an armed accomplice, the reporter said. Her father, Senator Evans, has issued a plea for her safe return, stating she is being manipulated and drugged. However, the FBI has placed the Ravellini organization on the top of the domestic threat list. A federal manhunt is underway. Marco turned off the TV. The room plunged back into silence. They just designated me a terrorist, Marco said calmly. That means they can bypass due process. They can freeze my assets. They can raid the estate without a judge. They can shoot on sight. And they think I'm helping you, I whispered. You are helping me, he reminded me. He turned to me, taking my face in his hands. We have a problem, Chloe. We have the evidence that clears us and hangs them, but we can't read it without that chess piece. And the man wearing it is about to be the most guarded man in America. If we don't get that key, I said, we're dead. Yes. And if we try to take it by force, we're dead. Yes. I looked at the black screen of the laptop. I looked at the stitches on his arm. I felt the soreness in my own body, the imprint of him still on my skin. I wasn't the scared girl in the tunnel anymore. I was the woman who had driven a getaway car. I was the woman who belonged to the Wolf of Boston. Then we don't take it by force, I said, my mind sharpening, the plan forming like a restoration strategy. We don't steal the key, Marco. Then how do we get it? I looked him in the eye. We let them invite us in. Marco frowned. What are you talking about? The narrative, I said. My father is selling the story that I'm a victim, that I'm drugged, that I was kidnapped. He needs that story to be true, or else he looks like he lost control of his own daughter. So, I said, my voice trembling but my resolve hardening like steel. What if the victim escapes? What if the prodigal daughter comes home? Marco froze. His grip on my face tightened, almost painfully. No, it's the only way, I insisted. If I go back, if I pretend I escaped you, they'll take me in. They'll bring me right to him, right to the key. Absolutely not, Marco growled, pulling back. I am not sending you back to that psychopath. He'll kill you. He won't kill me before the wedding, I argued. He needs the spousal privilege. He needs me to sign the papers. I have 24 hours, Marco, maybe 48. It's suicide, Chloe. He stood up, pacing the room, the predator caged. You saw Lucas tonight. He shot at you. You think I'm going to let you walk back into his house? Do you have a better plan? I challenged him, standing up too. Because from where I'm sitting, we're trapped in the woods with a useless hard drive and the entire US government coming to kill us. If we stay here, we die together. If I go back, we have a chance to win. Marco stopped pacing. He looked at me. His eyes were wide with fear, not for himself, but for me. It was the first time I had seen true fear in him. I promised to keep you safe, he whispered. I promised you would never have to go back. I walked over to him. I placed my hand on his chest, over his heart. You are keeping me safe, I said, by helping me end this. But to do that, I have to be the bait. He covered my hand with his. If you do this, if you walk out that door, I can't protect you until the trap springs. You'll be alone. I won't be alone, I said, looking up at him, because I know you'll come for me. The rain hammered against the roof, a relentless drumbeat of war. We stood there in the quiet of the safe house, the heat of our bodies fading into the cold reality of the night. The decision hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. I was going back to hell, but this time, I was bringing the devil with me. The gray light of dawn filtered through the reinforced shutters of the safe house, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floorboards. I woke up reaching for heat that wasn't there. The space beside me on the leather sofa was empty, the cushion cold to the touch. The only sound in the bunker was the hum of the air filtration system and the rhythmic tapping of keys. I sat up, pulling the thick wool blanket around my shoulders. My body ached, a dull, throbbing reminder of the adrenaline crash from the night before, compounded by a soreness that was entirely Marco's fault. I looked toward the kitchen island. Marco was standing by the security console, bathed in the blue glow of the monitors. He hadn't slept. He was still wearing the blood-stained dress pants from the gala, though he had discarded the ruined shirt. His torso was bare, wrapped in the fresh bandages I had applied, and the sight of his broad, scarred back, rigid with tension, sent a spike of anxiety straight through my chest. "What is it?" I asked, my voice raspy with sleep. He didn't turn around immediately. He stared at the screen for another second, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, before he finally swiveled to face me. His face was a mask of cold fury. "We have a problem," he said. I threw off the blanket and walked over to him, ignoring the chill in the air. On the monitor, the perimeter grid was lit up with red warning indicators. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures moving through the dense tree line surrounding the property. 6. No, 8 of them. "How?" I whispered. "You said this place was off the grid." "It is," Marco replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "No electronic footprint, no satellite linkage. The only people who knew about this location were my brother, who is dead, and the supplier who outfitted the panic room." "The supplier?" "Giavaro." Marco spat the name like a curse. "He provides weapons and safe houses to anyone with cash. I paid him a premium for exclusivity. It seems Lucas Vane paid him more." He reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy assault rifle, checking the chamber with a metallic clack that echoed in the silent room. He slid a fresh magazine into his Beretta and placed it on the counter, then looked at me. "Get to the bunker," he ordered. "There's a hatch in the pantry. It leads to a sub-basement with a separate air supply. Lock it from the inside. Do not open it until you hear my voice, specifically my voice. If anyone else tries to open it, you use the pistol I left down there." "No," I said. Marco froze. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't a discussion, Chloe. These aren't street thugs. They're moving in a tactical formation. They're here to liquidate the assets. That means me, and it means you." "Exactly," I countered, moving not toward the pantry, but toward the laundry room adjacent to the kitchen. "If they're a tactical team, they have thermite charges. They'll burn through a bunker hatch in 3 minutes. If you die up here, I die down there. I'm not hiding in a hole waiting to suffocate. Chloe, I'm not a soldier, Marco," I shouted, turning back to him. "I can't shoot a moving target at 50 yards. But I know chemistry, and I know this house is stocked with industrial cleaners because I saw them under the sink when I got the first aid kit. I kicked open the laundry room door. It was a small, narrow utility space. On the shelf sat rows of heavy plastic jugs. Bleach, ammonia-based glass cleaner, drain opener. "What are you doing?" Marco demanded, stepping into the doorway, the rifle held loose in his grip. "Improvising," I said, grabbing a gallon of bleach and a bottle of high-concentration ammonia floor stripper. "You want to clear the hallway?" "I'll clear the hallway." Marco looked at the bottles in my hands, then at my face. He realized what I was suggesting. The mixture of sodium hypochlorite and ammonia created chloramine gas. It was volatile, toxic, and instantly incapacitating to the respiratory system. It was a war crime in a bottle. "It's dangerous," he said. "The ventilation is independent in the main room," I finished for him. "We seal the laundry door. We wear wet masks. They breach the front door. They get a face full of chemical warfare. It buys you seconds. Seconds you need." He hesitated, the protective instinct warring with the strategist in him. Then, a loud thud reverberated through the house. Someone was testing the reinforced front door with a battering ram. "Do it," Marco growled. "But stay low. If you breathe it, you burn your lungs." He tossed me a thick rag from the counter. I ran it under the tap, soaking it in cold water, and tied it tight around my face. Marco did the same with a torn piece of his ruined shirt. "They're breaching in 10 seconds, Marco said, his voice muffled by the cloth. He positioned himself behind the heavy oak island, leveling the rifle at the entryway. "Get ready." I crouched in the laundry room doorway, the heavy jugs uncapped in my hands. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were steady. I poured the ammonia into a plastic bucket. Wham! The front door groaned. The wood splintered around the deadbolt. Wham! "Wait for it," Marco signaled with his hand. The door flew open with a crash, hanging off its hinges. Gray morning light flooded the entryway, followed immediately by 3 black-clad figures swarming in, weapons raised. "Now!" Marco yelled. I didn't throw the bucket. I poured the bleach into the ammonia, creating an instant, violent reaction, and shoved the bucket skittering across the hardwood floor into the narrow hallway that connected the entryway to the living room. White mist erupted from the bucket like a released phantom. "Clear!" one of the mercenaries shouted, but the word turned into a gagging cough mid-syllable. The gas expanded rapidly, filling the corridor. The mercenaries, expecting gunfire, weren't ready for a chemical assault. They stumbled, clawing at their throats. The chloramine hit their mucous membranes, turning into hydrochloric acid on contact. Their eyes burned, their airways constricted. "Fire!" one of them choked out, blindly spraying bullets into the ceiling. Marco didn't hesitate. He rose from behind the island, a dark, avenging angel in the haze. The rifle in his hands barked, controlled precise bursts of fire. Pop, 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 pop. The first 2 men dropped before they could even level their weapons. The third tried to retreat, stumbling back out the door, retching violently. "Stay down," Marco commanded me, moving forward. He didn't run into the gas. He skirted the edge of the living room, using the ventilation currents to his advantage. He moved to the side window, smashed the glass with the butt of his rifle, and engaged the targets outside who were still trying to figure out why their breach team was screaming. I stayed pressed against the washing machine, eyes squeezed shut. The wet rag pressed hard against my nose and mouth. The smell was acrid, piercing even through the water. The scent of a swimming pool on fire. Gunfire erupted from the yard, shattering the remaining windows. Shards of glass rained down on the leather sofa where we had slept. Marco was a blur of motion, firing, ducking, relocating. He wasn't fighting like a gangster. He was fighting like special forces. Efficient. Brutal. I heard a scream from outside. Then silence. Then the sound of a heavy body hitting the floorboards inside the house. "Clear!" Marco's voice came, rough and coughing. I scrambled up, keeping the mask on. The gas was dissipating, pulled out by the broken door and windows, but the air still stung. Marco was standing over a man in the entryway. The mercenary was alive, clutching a bleeding shoulder, his mask torn off, his face red and blistering from the fumes. Marco kicked the man's gun away and planted a heavy boot on his chest. "Who sent you?" Marco asked. His tone wasn't angry. It was terrifyingly conversational. The man wheezed, pink froth bubbling at his lips. "Go to hell." Marco leaned down and pressed his thumb directly into the bullet wound in the man's shoulder. The mercenary shrieked, a high, thin sound that cut through the ringing in my ears. "I'm already there," Marco said. "I'm the landlord. Now, I'll ask you one more time before I decide to let you choke on your own blood. Who sent you?" "Vane," the man gasped. "Vane and the senator." "We know that," Marco said, applying more pressure. "Tell me something I don't know. Why hit us now? Why not wait for the warrant? The timeline." The man choked out, tears streaming from his chemically burned eyes. They moved it up. I stepped forward, lowering my mask slightly as the air cleared. "Moved what up?" The mercenary looked at me, then at Marco. He realized he was dying anyway. "The wedding, and the flight." Marco eased the pressure slightly. "Talk. Tomorrow," the man wheezed. "The wedding is tomorrow morning. 10 a.m., St. Paul's. Immediately after the ceremony, the senator is boarding a private jet to Montenegro." "Montenegro," Marco repeated, looking at me. "Non-extradition treaty." "He's running," I whispered, the reality crashing down on me heavier than the roof. "He's not just laundering the money. He's cashing out. He's taking the key and leaving the country." "The key?" Marco demanded of the man on the floor. "Where is it?" "On him." The mercenary spat. "Always on him. He knows. He knows you have the files. He knows he can't decrypt them without the physical drive. He's taking it with him. Once he lands in Montenegro, he sells the codes to the highest bidder and disappears." Marco stared at the man for a second longer, then stepped back. He knocked the man unconscious with a swift, merciful blow to the temple with the butt of his rifle. Silence returned to the safe house, broken only by the wind whistling through the shattered door. The smell of bleach and gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Marco walked to the kitchen sink and splashed water on his face, washing away the residue of the gas and the sweat of the fight. When he turned to look at me, his eyes were haunted. "We can't get to him," Marco said. It was an admission of defeat, something I thought incapable of coming from his mouth. "If he's leaving tomorrow, the security will be impenetrable. The FBI, his private detail, the police. They'll form a phalanx around him. We can't hit a moving motorcade, and we can't storm a cathedral. We lose," I said, my voice hollow. "If he gets on that plane, the evidence is locked forever. We stay fugitives. You lose your empire. I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." "We survive," Marco corrected. "We have money in accounts they can't touch. We go to Europe, Asia. We disappear." "That's not living, Marco. That's hiding." I looked at the unconscious man on the floor, then at the destruction around us. "And he wins. He sells me. He tries to kill me, and he gets away with it. He gets to retire on a beach with millions of dollars while we live in the shadows. I'd rather live in the shadows with you than watch you die in the light," Marco said fiercely. I walked over to the shattered window. The rain had stopped, leaving a gray, oppressive mist hanging over the trees. My mind was racing, replaying the mercenary's words. "The wedding is tomorrow. St. Paul's." A plan began to form. It was reckless. It was insane. It was the only card we had left to play. "You can't storm the cathedral," I said, turning back to him. "You're right. You can't get close to him. So we leave," Marco said. "Pack what you can." "No," I said. "You can't get close." "But I can." Marco froze. He stopped reloading the magazine. "What did you say?" "The narrative," I reminded him, stepping closer, my voice gaining strength. "Think about what the news said. I'm the victim. I'm the mentally unstable daughter who was kidnapped by the mafia boss. My father needs that story to be true. He needs to play the grieving, worried father until the moment the wheels of that jet leave the tarmac. I know where this is going," Marco growled, his voice dropping an octave. "Stop. If I go back," I continued, ignoring him. "If I surrender, if I tell the police I escaped you, they take me straight to him. They take me to the house." "He'll kill you," Marco shouted, slamming his hand onto the granite counter. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "You are not walking back into that house, Chloe. Lucas shot at you. He tried to put a bullet in your head." "He won't kill me before the wedding," I argued, walking right up to him, grabbing his forearms. "He can't. He needs me to sign the papers to transfer the assets. He needs the spousal privilege to protect himself from the fallout. I have 24 hours of immunity, Marco. He has to marry me before he can kill me. It's too risky," Marco said, shaking his head, his eyes wild. "You're asking me to hand you over to the monster. I'm asking you to make me the Trojan horse," I said intensely. "I go in. I play the part. I let them think they've won. I get into the house. I find a way to get the key from around his neck. And then what?" Marco demanded. "You're trapped in a house with 20 armed guards and a psychopath. How do you get out? How do I get to you?" "The wedding," I said. "St. Paul's. It's a public event. Even if they lock it down, there will be press. There will be chaos. You hit them then. When I'm at the altar. When I have the key." Marco pulled away from me, pacing the ruined living room. He ran a hand through his hair, tugging at the roots. "It's madness. If they search you, if they find a wire..." "They won't find a wire because I won't wear one," I said. "I'll be clean. I just need a way to signal you. A way to open the vault. The key is physical," Marco muttered, his mind reluctantly engaging with the strategy. "If you get the drive, you still need to get it to me." "I will," I promised. "But you have to let me do this. You have to let me go." He stopped pacing. He looked at me across the room. The distance felt like a canyon. He looked at the bruises on my arms. The terror and exhaustion etched into my face, and the steel resolve in my eyes. "I promise to keep you safe," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Sending you back there. It breaks every instinct I have. You are keeping me safe," I said softly. "You're giving me a chance to fight back. I'm done running, Marco. I want to end this. I want to cut the head off the snake." He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly calculation. He wasn't looking at his lover anymore. He was looking at his operative. "If we do this," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "there is no margin for error. If you miss the window, if you can't get the key, I will burn Boston to the ground to get you out, but it might be too late." "I won't miss," I said. "You'll need a way to override the safe," Marco said, his mind moving 3 steps ahead. "The senator keeps a backup drive in his safe at home, in case he loses the necklace. You said you know the code, but he might have changed it." "He won't," I said. "He's arrogant." "We don't bet on arrogance," Marco countered. He walked to his equipment bag and pulled out a small metallic cylinder. It looked like a lipstick. "This isn't just a casing. It's a localized EMP and a brute force decryption tool. If you can get it near the keypad of his safe, it will cycle through every possible combination in under 3 minutes." He held it out to me. "And a tracker," he added. "I need to know exactly where you are every second." "They'll strip search me," I warned. "They'll check for bugs." "Not this," Marco said. He reached into the medical kit and pulled out a small translucent capsule. It looked like a vitamin. Ingestible. It pulses a low-frequency signal that cuts through interference. It dissolves in 24 hours. "Swallow it." I took the capsule. I didn't hesitate. I put it in my mouth and swallowed dry. "I'm on the grid," I said. Marco walked over to me. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into him with a force that knocked the breath out of my lungs. He buried his face in my hair, inhaling deeply. "I hate this," he whispered into my ear. "I hate everything about this." "I know," I said, holding him just as tight. "If he touches you," Marco vowed, his voice vibrating against my skull. "If he hurts you, I will peel the skin from his bones." "He won't have time," I said, pulling back to look at him. "Because you're going to be there." "I'll be there," he promised. "I'll be waiting for the signal." "How do I signal you?" "The ceremony," Marco said. "When the priest asks for objections, that's the window. You create the chaos. I bring the storm." I nodded. I was terrified. My hands were shaking again, but my mind was clear. "We need to make it look real," I said. "I need to look like I escaped, like I've been running through the woods all night." Marco looked at the door. "The highway is 2 miles south. Police patrol it every hour." He touched my cheek one last time. It felt like a goodbye. "Go," he said, the word costing him everything. "Before I change my mind and lock you in this house forever." I stepped away from him. I grabbed my jacket. I didn't look back at the warmth of the safe house. I stepped over the unconscious mercenary, over the shattered glass, and walked out into the cold, gray morning. I was going back to the beginning. I was going back to be the victim one last time, but they wouldn't see the wolf hiding under the wedding veil until it was too late. The asphalt of Interstate 90 was cold and gritty under my boots, vibrating with the rumble of distant traffic. I stood on the shoulder of the highway, shivering, not from the temperature, but from the violation of what I was about to do. I was about to dismantle myself. I was about to shed the skin of the survivor I had become in Marco's arms and put back on the mask of the broken, hysterical daughter. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of the lipstick tube. The EMP device Marco had given me. It was the only weapon I had. That, and the silent pulse of the tracker dissolving in my stomach. A digital lifeline connecting me to the man I had left behind in the woods. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of exhaust fumes and damp pine. Then, I stepped into the light. A state trooper cruiser was idling 100 yards down the breakdown lane, running a speed trap. I didn't walk toward it. I ran. I let my legs buckle slightly, let my hair fall in wild, tangled curtains across my face. I summoned every ounce of fear I had felt in the tunnels, every scream I had suppressed in the gallery, and I let it all rise to the surface. "Help!" I screamed, my voice cracking perfectly. "Please, help me!" I waved my arms frantically, stumbling into the edge of the driving lane. Brakes screeched. A horn blared. A long, angry note that tore through the morning silence. The trooper's car door flew open before he even put it in park. He was young, his hand dropping instinctively to his holster as he saw a woman running out of the mist. "Ma'am, get off the road," he shouted, rushing toward me. I collapsed onto the gravel shoulder, scraping my palms. I didn't get up. I curled into a ball, sobbing. It wasn't entirely acting. The exhaustion was real. The terror of what waited for me at the end of this ride was real. "He's coming." I gasped as the trooper knelt beside me. I grabbed his uniform sleeve, burying my face in the rough fabric. "He's coming back for me. Don't let him take me." "Who?" the trooper asked, his voice switching from authoritative to urgent. He clicked his radio. "Dispatch, I have a 1054 on I-90 eastbound. Female, mid-20s, visible distress. Send backup and EMS. Ravellini." I whispered the name like a curse, just loud enough for him to hear. "Marco Ravellini. He had a gun." The trooper stiffened. The name was radioactive. He pulled me up, positioning his body between me and the empty tree line, scanning the woods with wide, fearful eyes. "You're safe now," he lied. "Get in the car." I huddled in the back of the cruiser, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket, watching the world blur through the safety glass. The radio chatter was incessant. Codes, locations. The mention of Senator Evans' daughter sent a shockwave through the dispatch channels. Within 10 minutes, 3 more cruisers and an unmarked black sedan had boxed us in. They didn't take me to a hospital. They didn't take me to a police station. The convoy drove straight to the airfield, bypassing the usual protocols. The authority of the United States Senate, it seemed, superseded the need for a triage nurse. When the car finally stopped, we weren't at a precinct. We were at the gated entrance of the Evans estate in Brookline. The iron gates, which usually stood as a monument to old money and exclusion, swung open to swallow me whole. My stomach twisted. I wasn't returning home. I was returning to the crime scene. The cruiser stopped at the portico. Before the trooper could open my door, it was yanked open from the outside. My father stood there. Senator William Evans looked impeccable, as always. Navy suit, silver hair perfectly coiffed. the American flag pin glinting on his lapel. To the cameras that I knew were lurking beyond the perimeter, he looked like a worried patriarch. To me, he looked like a butcher inspecting a shipment that had fallen off the truck. "Chloe," he said. There was no relief in his voice, only possession. He reached in and grabbed my arm. His grip was hard, his fingers digging into the sensitive flesh of my bicep where a bruise was already forming. He hauled me out of the car, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a restraint. "Thank God," he said loudly, for the benefit of the troopers standing by. "My poor girl, look at you." He pressed my face into his shoulder. I smelled his cologne. Expensive, musky, cloying. It was the scent of my childhood fear. I tried to get away. I sobbed into his jacket, playing my part. I ran all night. "Shh," he hissed in my ear, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that only I could hear. "If you say one word about the paintings, I will have you lobotomized in a Swiss clinic before the week is out." I pulled back, letting my eyes widen with a manic, fragile terror. "I just want to sleep. Please, Daddy. I just want it to stop." "It's over now," he said, turning to the lead officer. "Thank you, Lieutenant. My family is indebted to you. My personal medical team will take it from here. She needs privacy and sedation." "Senator, we need to take a statement regarding Ravellini," the officer started. "Tomorrow," my father snapped. "Can't you see she's in shock? Get off my property." He didn't wait for an answer. He dragged me up the steps and into the house. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, cutting off the sunlight, the police, and the last hope of rescue. The foyer was exactly as I remembered it. Cold marble, looming portraits of ancestors who looked down with judgmental stares, and the silence of a mausoleum. But today, the silence was broken by a slow, mocking clap. Lucas Vane emerged from the library. He looked different than he had at the gallery. The smooth, polished politician was gone. In his place was a man with dark circles under his eyes and a bandage wrapped around his right hand where Marco had shot the gun out of his grip. He walked with a slight limp, favoring the leg where the concrete shrapnel had hit him. "The runaway bride returns," Lucas said, his voice dripping with acid. He walked up to me, invading my personal space. My father released my arm, but he didn't step between us. He went to the sideboard and poured himself a drink, ignoring the predator circling his daughter. "You look terrible, Chloe," Lucas observed, reaching out to touch a lock of my matted hair. I flinched violently, slapping his hand away. "Don't touch me," I screamed, keeping up the act of the traumatized victim. "You tried to kill me. I tried to save you," Lucas corrected smoothly, though his eyes promised retribution. "You were being abducted by a terrorist. I was firing at the threat. It's a tragedy you were in the crossfire." He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him. His grip was painful. "Where is he? Where is Ravellini?" "I don't know," I stammered, tears leaking from my eyes. He dropped me in the woods. He said I was slowing him down. He ran north." "North," Lucas repeated, skeptical. He looked at my father. "We need to search her." "Lucas." My father sighed, taking a sip of scotch. "She was with him for 2 days, William," Lucas snapped. "He's a strategist. He wouldn't just let her go. She's a liability, unless she's a messenger." Lucas turned back to me. "Strip." My blood ran cold. "No. I said strip," Lucas roared, the facade cracking completely. "Right here. Now. I want to know what you're carrying." "I'm not wearing a wire," I yelled, backing away until I hit the staircase banister. I escaped. I barely got away with my life. "Check her," my father ordered, bored. "We can't take chances." Lucas grabbed the front of my jacket, the oversized tactical jacket Marco had given me, and ripped the zipper down. He shoved it off my shoulders. He patted down the pockets of my jeans, his hands rough and invasive. He checked my waistband, his fingers lingering inappropriately, making my skin crawl with a nausea that had nothing to do with the chemical gas I'd inhaled earlier. He found nothing. No phone. No wire. No gun. "Shoes," he commanded. I kicked off the boots. He shook them out. Nothing. He stepped back, looking frustrated. He circled me, eyeing the lipstick tube that I had shoved into the coin pocket of my jeans. a pocket so small and tight he hadn't felt the cylinder during the pat-down. It was a gamble. A terrifying, reckless gamble. If he asked me to empty my pockets, it was over. "Open your mouth," he said. I opened it. He grabbed my jaw, tilting my head back, looking under my tongue, checking my molars for a transmitter. He saw nothing but my throat. The tracker was already deep in my digestive tract, pulsing silently, invisible to the naked eye. "Clean," Lucas muttered, stepping back. He looked disappointed. "Satisfied?" I spat, pulling my jacket back up to cover my trembling body. "For now," Lucas said. "Take her upstairs. Lock her in the East Wing. Dr. Eris is coming to administer a sedative. I want her unconscious until the ceremony." "The ceremony?" I asked, feigning confusion. "What ceremony?" "Our wedding, darling." Lucas smiled, a shark baring its teeth. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. We moved it up. We can't let a little thing like an abduction ruin our special day, can we? Besides, the public sympathy will be incredible for the Poles. The brave survivor marrying her hero." My father set his glass down. "Take her up. 2 guards on the door. No one enters except the doctor." 2 of the private security contractors, men who looked indistinguishable from the ones Marco had gassed, stepped forward. They took my arms and marched me up the grand staircase. I didn't fight them. I let my feet drag. I let my head hang low. But as we ascended, I counted the steps. I noted the position of the cameras. I clocked the shift change of the guards in the hallway. They shoved me into my old bedroom and slammed the door. I heard the distinct click-clack of the external deadbolt engaging. I was trapped. I waited. I waited for 10 minutes, standing in the center of the room that had been my childhood prison. The pink wallpaper, the canopy bed, the shelves lined with participation trophies I hadn't wanted. It was all a shrine to a girl who didn't exist anymore. Then, the door opened again. A man in a white coat entered, carrying a black medical bag. Dr. Eris. My father's personal physician, a man who wrote prescriptions for donors' wives and looked the other way when interns overdosed at campaign parties. "Chloe," he said, his voice oily with false concern. "Your father is very worried. You're agitated." "I'm not agitated," I said, backing away. "I'm terrified. This will help," he said, pulling a syringe from his bag. "Just a mild sedative. To help you sleep through the trauma." I looked at the needle. If he knocked me out, I would miss the window. I wouldn't be able to signal Marco. I wouldn't be able to get the key. I had to act. "I'll take it," I said, my voice trembling. "Please, I just want to forget." He relaxed, lowering his guard. "That's a good girl. Sit on the bed." I sat. He approached, swabbing my arm with alcohol. As he leaned in, focusing on finding a vein, I moved. I didn't punch him. I wasn't Marco. I used what was there. I grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the bedside table and swung it with both hands. The base connected with the side of his head with a sickening thud. Dr. Eris crumpled to the floor without a sound. I froze, listening. Had the guards heard? Silence. The heavy oak door was soundproofed, a feature my father had installed years ago to keep my crying from disturbing his meetings. For once, his cruelty was my advantage. I checked the doctor's pulse. Strong, steady. He was out, but alive. I dragged him behind the bed and stripped off his white coat. I didn't put it on. It wouldn't fit, and it wouldn't fool the guards, but I raided his bag. I found a bottle of pills, benzodiazepines. I pocketed them. I found a roll of medical tape. Then I went to the window. It was barred, another safety measure from my teenage years. Escape was impossible that way. I looked at the clock. 2 a.m. The house was quiet. The guards would be tired. I retrieved the lipstick tube from my pocket. Marco had explained how it worked. It wasn't just a jammer. It was a localized frequency overload device. It could fry a digital lock from 6 inches away, but the lock was on the outside of my door. I went to the door and knelt by the keyhole. It was an old-fashioned mechanical deadbolt reinforced with a modern magnetic strip. The lipstick wouldn't work on the deadbolt. Panic flared in my chest. I had the tech to crack a safe, but I was defeated by a piece of iron. Then I remembered the vents. The house was old, but the HVAC system had been updated. There was a return vent near the ceiling. It led to the central shaft. It wouldn't fit a person, but sound traveled. I dragged the desk chair over to the vent. I climbed up and put my ear to the grate. I could hear the guards talking in the hallway. Shift ends in 20. Man, Vane is losing it. Did you see him kicking the dog earlier? Just keep your head down. We get the bonus once the jet takes off. 20 minutes. Shift change. That was the gap. I waited. It was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I sat on the floor, clutching the lipstick device, breathing in rhythm with the tracker in my gut. I am not alone, I told myself. Marco is watching the dot on a screen. He knows I'm here. Finally, I heard heavy footsteps retreating. Then, a brief silence before the new set of footsteps would arrive. It was a window of maybe 30 seconds. I didn't try to pick the lock. I used the medical tape. I taped the latch of the door, not the deadbolt, but the catch. It was a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they hadn't engaged the deadbolt fully, or that in their laziness, they relied on the magnetic seal. I tried the handle. Locked. I leaned my forehead against the wood. Think, Chloe. Think. The doctor. I ran back to Dr. Aris. I searched his pockets. Keys. A ring of keys. I grabbed them, my hands shaking so hard I dropped them twice. I ran back to the door. I tried the first key. It didn't fit. The second. No. The third. It slid in. I turned it. The deadbolt clicked back. I cracked the door open. The hallway was empty. The new guards hadn't rounded the corner yet. I slipped out, closing the door softly behind me. I was barefoot, moving like a ghost across the Persian runners. I didn't go toward the exits. I went deeper into the belly of the beast. My father's study. It was on the ground floor, past the library. I used the servants' staircase, the narrow, creaky steps I used to sneak down for snacks as a child. I froze at every shadow, every settling timber of the house sounding like a gunshot. I reached the study door. It was closed. A keypad glowed blue next to the handle. This was it. I pulled the cap off the lipstick device. I held it up to the keypad. I pressed the activation button on the bottom. The device hummed. A sound barely audible, like a mosquito. The blue light on the keypad flickered. Numbers began to cycle rapidly on the display, a blur of red LEDs. Calculating. Come on. Come on. Hey! A voice shouted from the hallway behind me. I spun around. A guard was standing at the end of the corridor, his flashlight beam hitting me in the face. She's out. The girl is out. He yelled into his radio, reaching for his gun. The keypad beeped. A solid green light. Access granted. I threw the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and throwing the manual bolt just as a bullet splintered the wood where my head had been. I was in. But now I was under siege. Open the door! The guard screamed, pounding on it. We have her cornered in the study. I didn't have time. I ran to the painting on the far wall, a portrait of George Washington. I swung it aside. Behind it sat the wall safe. This was the backup. Marco was right. My father was paranoid. He kept a copy of everything. The safe had a biometric scanner and a digital keypad. I held the lipstick device to it again. Come on, Marco's tech, I whispered. Don't fail me now. The door behind me shook as they started ramming it. Chloe. It was Lucas's voice. Open this door or I swear to God I will burn this room down with you in it. The safe buzzed. Error. My heart stopped. It didn't work. The safe was shielded. No, 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 I whimpered. I looked around the room frantically. The desk. The chaotic mess of papers. My father's arrogance. He never thought anyone would get this far. I grabbed the heavy bust of Lincoln from the desk and smashed it against the keypad of the safe. Nothing. Then I saw it. On the desk, sitting in a crystal bowl of random items, cufflinks, coins, matches, was a USB drive. Not just any drive. It was a black rook, identical to the one on his necklace. It wasn't in the safe. He had left it on his desk. Because he was so sure of his security, so sure that I was sedated upstairs, that he hadn't even bothered to lock up the backup. He had probably been reviewing the files before bed. I grabbed the rook. I pulled the cap off. It was a standard USB-C connector. The door hinges screamed. They were breaking through. I needed to hide it. If they found it on me, it was over. I looked at my hand. The bandage from where I had scraped it on the highway was peeling. No, too obvious. My hair. I had wrapped my hair in a messy bun. I shoved the small chest piece deep into the thick mass of red curls, pinning it in place with the bobby pins, weaving it so tight it felt like part of my skull. The door exploded inward. Lucas stormed in, followed by 3 guards. He looked deranged. His eyes were bloodshot, his face purple with rage. "You little bitch." He crossed the room in 2 strides and backhanded me. The force of the blow knocked me into the bookshelf. I tasted blood. "Check the room," he screamed at the guards. "Check everything. What did she touch?" I lay on the floor, curled up, protecting my head, and the drive hidden in my hair. "I just wanted to call him," I sobbed, pointing at the desk phone. "I just wanted to call Marco. I miss him." Lucas stopped. He looked at the phone, then at me. He laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. "You broke out of a secure room, assaulted a doctor, and breached my security to make a phone call to your boyfriend?" He grabbed me by the hair, thankfully gripping the base of the ponytail, missing the rook by inches, and hauled me up. "You really are insane," he spat. "Dr. Eris was right. The sedation didn't take. We need a higher dose." "Sir," one of the guards said, "the safe hasn't been touched." She didn't open it. Lucas looked at the safe, then at the desk. The crystal bowl was undisturbed. He didn't notice the missing rook because he didn't know the backup existed. Only my father knew, and my father was asleep upstairs. "Take her back," Lucas ordered, shoving me into the arms of the guards. "And this time, zip-tie her to the bed frame. If she moves an inch, break her legs. She just needs to be able to say 'I do' tomorrow. She doesn't need to walk." They dragged me out. My cheek throbbed, my lip was split, and my ribs ached. But as they marched me back to my prison, a wild, hysterical laughter bubbled in my chest. I had it. I had the key. I was bruised. I was bleeding. And I was about to be tied to a bed like a sacrificial lamb. But I had the black rook woven into my hair. I looked out the window as we passed the landing. The sun was starting to rise. The sky was bleeding red and gold. "I'm ready, Marco," I thought, sending the thought out into the ether as the tracker pulsed in my gut. "I have the payload. Bring the storm." The layers of foundation felt heavy on my skin, a suffocating mask of beige designed to hide the purple bruise blooming on my cheekbone. The makeup artist, a woman with trembling hands who clearly knew better than to ask questions, dabbed concealer over my split lip. I sat frozen in the vanity chair of the bridal suite at the cathedral, staring at my reflection. The woman looking back was a stranger. She was pale, hollow-eyed, and draped in a gown of Chantilly lace that cost more than a house. But beneath the layers of tulle and silk, my heart was beating a frantic, steady rhythm against my ribs. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't fear. It was a countdown. Inside my stomach, the tracker Marco had given me was pulsing, sending a silent scream to a receiver somewhere in the city. And woven deep into the intricate, painful chignon piled high on my head, hidden beneath a spray of diamond pins and hairspray, was the black rook, the key to the kingdom. The metal edges dug into my scalp, a grounding pain that kept me focused. "You look beautiful, Miss Evans," the makeup artist whispered, packing her bag quickly. She wanted to leave. She could smell the violence in the air. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. The door opened. My father filled the frame. He was wearing a morning suit, looking every inch the distinguished statesman. He dismissed the makeup artist with a wave of his hand. When the door clicked shut, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He walked over to me, placing his hands on my bare shoulders. I suppressed the urge to vomit. "This is it, Chloe," he said, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "No more games. No more running. You walk down that aisle, you say 'I do,' and you smile for the cameras. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said softly. "If you try anything," he leaned down, his breath hot against my ear. "If you trip, If you cry, if you hesitate, I have men stationed at every exit, and I will give the order to find Marco Ravellini and burn him alive in whatever hole he's hiding in." I didn't flinch. He thought Marco was hiding. He thought he had won. "I'm ready, Father," I said. "Let's get this over with." He scrutinized me for a moment, looking for the cracks, for the hysteria I had displayed yesterday. Finding only resignation, he nodded, satisfied. He offered me his arm. We walked out of the suite and toward the massive double doors of the cathedral nave. The sound of the organ vibrated through the floorboards, a heavy, ominous chord that sounded more like a funeral dirge than a wedding march. "Wait here," the coordinator signaled. The doors swung open. The flash of cameras was blinding. Hundreds of them. The press had been allowed into the vestibule and the back of the church, a calculated move to show the world the happy union. Beyond the wall of paparazzi, the pews were packed with the city's elite. Judges, senators, business tycoons, and members of the crime syndicates my father did business with. It was a congregation of wolves in designer suits, and at the end of the long red-carpeted aisle stood Lucas Vane. He watched me with a possessive, hungry sneer. He was tapping his thigh with his bandaged hand. He looked impatient. He looked like a man who was moments away from claiming his prize. My father tugged my arm. "Walk." I stepped forward. Every step was a battle. My legs felt heavy, but I forced them to move. Left, right, left, right. I fixed my eyes on Lucas, letting him see the submission he wanted. I needed him to lower his guard. I scanned the periphery without moving my head. The security was tight. Men with earpieces lined the walls every 10 feet. There were snipers in the choir loft. I had seen the glint of a scope when the doors opened. It was a fortress. But Marco had said he would be the storm. I reached the altar. My father handed me off to Lucas like a baton in a relay race. Lucas grabbed my hand, his fingers squeezing mine hard enough to grind the bones together. "You made it," he whispered, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I was worried you'd try to fly out a window." "I know when I'm beaten," I murmured, lowering my eyes. The priest, an elderly man who had likely been bribed to ignore the tension radiating off the groom, began the liturgy. His voice droned on about sanctity, love, and honor. Words that had no place in this building today. The ceremony dragged on. The air grew stifling, thick with the scent of incense and expensive perfume. My heart rate accelerated. The moment was coming. The signal. I looked up at the stained glass windows high above the altar. Was he there? Was he watching? "Do you, Lucas Vane, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Lucas said, his voice ringing out with sickening confidence. "And do you, Chloe Evans, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The silence stretched. 1 second. 2. Lucas's grip tightened painfully on my hand. My father shifted in the front pew. I started, my voice trembling. The priest nodded, eager to wrap this up. "If there is anyone here present who has just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." This was it. I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I simply looked directly into a camera lens positioned near the altar, and I smiled. A cold, sharp, predatory smile. The lights in the cathedral died. All of them. The chandeliers, the spotlights, the camera feeds. The church was plunged into absolute pitch darkness. A collective gasp rose from the congregation, followed by the rustle of panic. Then, sound exploded. It wasn't the organ. It was a voice, amplified through the massive cathedral speakers at a volume that shook the dust from the rafters. "She's not necessary after the merger is complete. An accident, an overdose. She's the perfect scapegoat." My father's voice, crystal clear. The recording Marco and I had discussed, the one from the library. "Once the assets are liquidated, do whatever you want with her." The lights flickered back on, but they were strobing now, harsh, blinding flashes of red and white. Chaos erupted. People were screaming, scrambling over pews. The press was in a frenzy, flashes popping wildly as they realized they were witnessing a scandal of biblical proportions. Lucas dropped my hand as if I burned him. He spun around, looking for the source of the audio. "Cut the sound! Kill it! Senator Evans!" a reporter shouted from the back. "Is that your voice?" "It's a deep fake," my father roared, standing up, his face purple. "It's a lie." But the audio continued. Lucas's voice filled the church next. "I'll make it look like a suicide. The grieving husband plays well with the voters." Lucas pulled a gun. He didn't care about the cameras anymore. He didn't care about the politics. He saw his life disintegrating in real time. He turned the weapon on me. "You bitch!" he screamed, raising the silver revolver. "You recorded us!" I didn't move. I didn't have to. The stained glass window behind the altar, the massive depiction of St. Michael casting down Satan, shattered inward. Glass rained down like diamonds. Ropes dropped from the darkness of the vaulted ceiling. Figures descended. Not angels, soldiers, clad in tactical black, FBI emblazoned on their vests in bold yellow letters. But one figure didn't use a rope. He emerged from the shadows of the sacristy door, stepping onto the altar as if he owned the very ground of God. Marco. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't hiding. He was wearing a dark suit, his shirt unbuttoned, his face a mask of calculated violence. He held a gun in one hand, leveled steady and true. "Lucas!" Marco's voice cut through the chaos, deeper and more terrifying than the amplified recording. Lucas spun toward him, distracting him from me. "Ravellini!" Lucas shrieked, swinging his gun toward Marco. It was a mistake. Marco fired. One shot. The bullet struck Lucas's right shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped the gun, howling in pain, clutching the shattered joint. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" The FBI team hit the ground running. They swarmed the altar, weapons drawn. But they weren't aiming at Marco. They were aiming at the senator's security detail. My father tried to run. He scrambled toward the side exit, pushing past a bewildered bishop. 2 agents tackled him before he made it 3 steps. The sight of Senator William Evans, the untouchable kingmaker, face down on the marble floor with his hands cuffed behind his back, was an image that would be burned into history. I stood alone in the center of the storm. The wedding dress felt miles heavy. Marco walked toward me. He didn't run. He walked with a terrifying calm, stepping over Lucas Vane, who was writhing on the ground, bleeding onto the white altar steps. Marco stopped in front of Lucas. He looked down. "I told you," Marco said, his voice audible even over the screaming crowd. "She stays with me." He kicked Lucas's gun skittering across the floor, away from the grasping hand of the fallen groom. Then he looked at me. The violence drained from his face instantly. He holstered his weapon and closed the distance between us. He reached out, his hands hovering for a second as if checking for injuries, before he grabbed my face. "Did he touch you?" Marco demanded, scanning my bruised cheek, my split lip. "Tell me." "No," I breathed, my knees finally giving way. "I'm okay. You came. I told you I would bring the storm," he whispered roughly. "Miss Evans." An FBI agent, a tall woman with a no-nonsense face, approached us. She looked at Marco with wariness, but didn't arrest him. They had a deal. "We have the senator. We have the confession on tape. But we need the physical evidence. The encryption key." I nodded. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't reach up. "It's here," I said, tilting my head. "In my hair." Marco understood. He reached up, his fingers gentle as they navigated the complex structure of the bridal updo. He found the pins. He pulled them out, letting the heavy mass of red curls tumble down around my shoulders. He felt around until his fingers brushed the cold metal of the black rook. He pulled it out. He held it up. The USB drive caught the strobing emergency lights, a small black piece of plastic that contained the ruin of 20 powerful men. He handed it to the agent. "The Da Vinci files," Marco said. "Full decryption. Names, dates, bank accounts. It's all there." The agent took it, bagging it immediately. "And you're part of the deal, Mr. Ravellini. I'm walking out of here," Marco said flatly. "And I'm taking her with me." The agent hesitated. She looked at the chaos, at the senator being dragged away, at Lucas bleeding out under the care of a medic. She looked at the undeniable evidence Marco had just handed her. A career-making bust. We have a 20-minute window before the local PD secures the perimeter, the agent said, checking her watch. After that, I can't guarantee your freedom. Go. Marco didn't waste a second. He wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me into his side. Let's go home, Chloe. We didn't leave through the back. We walked down the center aisle. The press was still there, shocked into silence, cameras rolling. I didn't hide my face. I walked with my head high, the ruined wedding dress trailing behind me like a shroud. I walked past the people who had come to watch me be sold. I walked past the society that had ignored my bruises for years. Marco shielded me from the flashes, his body a solid wall between me and the world. As we reached the heavy oak doors, the rain was falling again outside. A cleansing deluge. Wait, I said, stopping at the threshold. Marco paused, looking down at me. What is it? I reached down and grabbed the layers of tulle and silk of my skirt. I ripped the fabric. It tore easily, ruined by the day's events. I stepped out of the heavy train, leaving the bulk of the wedding dress in a pile on the church steps. I was left in the silk slip, shivering in the cold air, but free. Now I'm ready, I said. Marco took off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm and smelled of him. Gunpowder and sandalwood. The car is waiting, he said. We ran into the rain, hand in hand. Not away from something this time. Toward something. The black Aston Martin was idling at the curb, engine purring. I slid into the passenger seat. Marco got behind the wheel. As we peeled away from the curb, leaving the sirens and the scandal in the rearview mirror, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the lipstick device Marco had given me. I didn't need to use it, I said, tossing it onto the dashboard. He left the key on his desk. He was so arrogant he didn't even lock the backup. Marco laughed. It was a sound of pure relief, a rough, beautiful sound. He reached over and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. You did it, Chloe, he said. You took down the untouchables. We did it. I corrected. I squeezed his hand. Where are we going? The safe house is burned. We're going to the airport, Marco said, glancing at me with a smirk. But not to Montenegro. Where then? Italy, he said. I have a villa on Lake Como. It needs a lot of work. The frescoes are peeling. The art is in disrepair. I looked at him, hope blooming in my chest so painful and bright it made me dizzy. It sounds like you need a restorer, I said. I do, Marco said, lifting my hand to his lips. I need the best. And I hear she's finally free. The city of Boston faded behind us. A gray smear of rain and bad memories. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. The tracker was still in my gut. The bruises still throbbed on my face. But for the first time in my life, the silence inside my head wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Marco? I whispered. Yeah? I'm not running anymore. I know, he said, tightening his grip on my hand. Neither am I. We drove into the storm, but the fear was gone. We were the eye of the hurricane now, and nothing could touch us. The sunlight hitting the surface of Lake Como didn't look like the sun in Boston. It was softer, older, filtered through the haze of the Italian Alps and the scent of lemon trees that lined the terrace. I sat on a wrought iron stool. A palette of oil paints balanced on my knee, staring at the canvas in front of me. It wasn't a new creation. It was a resurrection. The canvas was the silent Madonna, the fake Raphael that had hung in the Lombra Gallery 4 months ago, the painting Marco had slashed open with a scalpel to retrieve the evidence that brought down a senator. It sat on my easel now, the jagged, violent tear down the center slowly disappearing under my brushstrokes. I was stitching the Madonna back together, layer by layer, pigment by pigment. I dipped my brush into a mixture of ochre and linseed oil. My hands, which had once shaken so violently I couldn't hold a glass of water, were steady. The tiny white scar low on my abdomen, where the tracker had once sat like a ticking threat, was the only reminder my body still carried of being hunted. A shadow fell across the terrace. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for a weapon. I knew that shadow. I knew the weight of the steps that approached me, the specific rhythm of the boots on the ancient stone tiles. You're working too hard, a voice rumbled, low and rich like the espresso sitting cold on the table beside me. Marco Ravellini stepped into my peripheral vision. He looked different here. The perpetual tension of Boston, the coiled spring of a man constantly anticipating an ambush, had loosened slightly. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing the scar on his forearm, where I had stitched him up in a safe house that felt a lifetime away. "I'm not working," I said, looking up at him. "I'm healing her." Marco walked behind me. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs digging into the muscles of my neck. His touch was heavy, grounding. It was the anchor that kept me from drifting away into the surreal beauty of our new life. "She looks better than she did in the gallery," Marco noted, looking at the painting. "Even before I ruined her. She was a lie back then," I said, cleaning my brush. "A shell to hide corruption. Now she's just art. She's honest." I leaned my head back against his stomach. He smelled of salt water and engine fuel. He had been out on the boat, meeting with associates from the Camorra. We hadn't left the life. We had just ascended above the grime of it. "Did the meeting go well?" I asked. "It went as expected," Marco said, his fingers trailing down my collarbone. "The foundation is officially registered, the Ravellini Heritage Trust. We have the permits to begin acquiring Renaissance pieces for cultural preservation. The money from the Boston operations is now flowing through legitimate auction houses in Milan and Zurich. It's clean, Chloe. All of it. And the heat? Gone," he said. "The FBI has what they wanted. They have the heads of the Hydra. They don't care about the body anymore. Between my testimony and that drive, we'd given them enough to keep them busy and to keep their sights off us for a very long time." He walked around the stool and leaned against the stone balustrade, blocking the view of the lake. He wanted me to look at him, and I did. I could never get enough of looking at him. "I saw the paper this morning," I said quietly. Marco's expression didn't change. He knew which paper. The Boston Globe International edition that was delivered to the villa every day. "And my father," I said, testing the weight of the word. It didn't hurt anymore. It felt like saying the name of a stranger. "They found him in his cell, bed sheets tied to the bars." Marco nodded once, sharp and final. There was no pity in his eyes. He was a coward to the end. He knew the trial would destroy his legacy. He chose the exit that let him keep a shred of control. "And Lucas?" "ADX Florence," Marco said, the name of the Supermax prison rolling off his tongue like a sentence. "Solitary confinement, 23 hours a day in a concrete box. He'll live a long time, Chloe. Long enough to remember every second of that wedding ceremony." I looked down at my hands. They were stained with paint. Ultramarine blue and cadmium red. Not blood. Never again blood. "I don't feel sad," I admitted. "I thought I would. He was my father. But I feel light. That's because the weight is gone," Marco said. He pushed off the railing and stepped into my personal space, his thighs brushing against my knees. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart skipped a beat. "Marco, I didn't get to give you a wedding gift," he said softly. "The last time we were at an altar, I was too busy shooting the groom." I laughed. A genuine bubbling sound that echoed off the villa walls. "You have a strange definition of romance, Mr. Ravellini." "Open it." I took the box. It wasn't a ring. I opened the lid to reveal a heavy silver pendant on a delicate chain. It was a rook, a chess piece. But it wasn't the cheap plastic drive I had stolen from my father's desk. This was solid platinum, with tiny emeralds set into the crenellations. "To remind you," Marco said, his voice dropping to that rough whisper that made my toes curl, "that the most powerful piece on the board isn't the king. It's the queen who knows how to move in the dark." My eyes stung. I took the necklace out, the cool metal heavy in my palm. "Put it on me?" I turned around, lifting my hair. Marco's fingers brushed the nape of my neck, sending shivers down my spine as he fastened the clasp. He didn't pull away. He kissed the sensitive spot just below my ear, his breath hot against my skin. "I have something for you too," I whispered. Marco paused. "I don't need anything. I have the villa. I have the empire. I have you. You might need this," I said. I stood up, setting the palette aside. I turned to face him. I was wearing a loose linen dress, gathered at the waist. I took his hand, the large, scarred hand that had held a gun to protect me, that had pulled me out of the rain, and I placed it on my stomach. By then, the curve was undeniable. It was a firm, rounded swell beneath the fabric, a secret we had kept between us in the chaos of the move, the lawyers, and the transition. Marco went still. His hand didn't move. He stared at his own fingers splayed across my belly, his eyes widening. For the first time since I had met him, the Wolf of Boston looked stunned. Chloe. He breathed. The name was a prayer. We beat the odds, Marco, I said, my voice trembling slightly. We didn't just survive. We created. He looked up at me, and the raw emotion in his dark eyes shattered me. There was awe there. There was terror. And there was a love so fierce it felt like a physical force. A baby, he murmured, as if testing the reality of it. A legacy, I corrected. Not one of blood and crime. One of us. He's going to grow up here, Marco. In the sun. He's never going to know the tunnels. He's never going to know the fear. Marco dropped to his knees, right there on the terrace stones. He pressed his face against my stomach, his arms wrapping around my waist, holding me as if I were made of glass and iron all at once. I felt his shoulders shake. Just once. I will burn the world to keep him safe, he vowed, his voice muffled against my dress. I will tear the sky down before I let anything touch either of you. I ran my fingers through his dark hair, looking out at the lake. The water shimmered, peaceful and indifferent. You don't have to burn the world anymore, I said softly. We own it. He stood up slowly, keeping his hands on me. He looked at the restored painting, then at the horizon, then at me. You saved me, he said. That night in the rain, I thought I was saving a damsel, but I was the one drowning. I was dead, Chloe. I was a machine made of violence. You woke me up. You gave me a door, I replied. I was running to nowhere. You gave me a destination. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. We breathed the same air, shared the same silence. Are you happy? He asked. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything we had lost to get here. I thought about the cold tunnel under the hotel. I thought about the chemical burn in my lungs. I thought about the moment I walked down the aisle to a man who wanted me dead. I'm not just happy, I said. I'm free. Marco smiled. It wasn't the predatory smirk of the dawn. It was the smile of a man who had won the only war that mattered. Then paint, he said, nodding at the canvas. Paint it all. Paint the lake. Paint the baby. Paint the life we stole from them. I will, I promised. He kissed me. It was a slow, deep kiss, tasting of lemon and promise. When he pulled away, he lingered, his hand covering the platinum rook at my throat. I have to make a call, he said. Milan is waiting for the authorization on the new security system. Go, I said. We'll be here. He walked back toward the glass doors of the villa. At the threshold, he stopped. He turned back, his silhouette framed by the dark interior of the house that was our fortress. Chloe? Yes? You knocked on my door, he said, echoing the words he had spoken that first night, in a different life. And you opened it, I replied. Stay with me, he said. The command was gone. It was a plea. It was a vow. I smiled, picking up my brush, dipping it into the green paint. The color of life, the color of the dress I had worn the night I became his. Always, I said. He watched me for another second, then disappeared into the house. I turned back to the canvas. I painted the Madonna's robes. I painted the light. I painted the future, stroke by stroke, secure in the knowledge that behind me, the door was locked, the gate was guarded, and the monster who lived inside was no longer a monster to me. He was my husband. He was the father of my child, and he was the only safety I would ever need. The end.